This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. One of my great combination episodes today, but a little bit different, grabbing 5 monologues, just me talking, and then one interview at the end. The monologues, pass the dough. That's the first one. The second one, speculation wins. The third one, simplicity trumps complexity. The fourth one, the statistical mindset. And last but not least on the monologues, instruments versus strategy. And to bring up the rear on those 5 monologues, an interview with Lasse Peterson of AQR. AQR, founded by Cliff Asness, one of the very large systematic traders in operation today. I think you will find this radically odd, eclectic combination of my content interesting as hell. Well, gosh, I hope you find it interesting as hell. We'll see. Jump in and give it a listen. Kansas City. That song was number 1 in America, May 25th, 1959. A date that means absolutely nothing to me. I wasn't born. I sure as hell had no idea that there was anything relevant to the subject of trend following on May 25th, 1959 in Time magazine. Now, the song has nothing to do with Time magazine or what I'm going to talk about. I just looked it up and happened to be the number 1 song when this issue of Time magazine came out. Why am I talking about Time magazine? May 25th, 1959, there was an article titled Pass the Dough. P-A-S-D-E, dough, like money. Pass the dough, pass the money. I had to spend my $3 on the Time magazine website to get access. And boom, I now have probably one of the first trend-following articles to ever appear in a major publication in America. So how did this random event in my life start? Ira Schumann, a gentleman residing in Washington, D.C., randomly sends me an email the other day. In that email, he includes a scan of the front and back cover of a book, How I Made $2 Million in the Stock Market by Nicholas Darvas. I've heard of this book for years. I've never read it. I've read about half of it right now. I get the picture. I know what it is. It's trend following. But Ira sends me a scan of the front and back of this book, How I Made $2 Million in the Stock Market, and one other book by Nicholas Darvas. And the quote on one of the backs of the books, such a just grab you and say 1959, trend following, it's not new. Quote, the only sound reason for my buying a stock is that it is rising in price. If that is happening, no other reason is required. If that is not happening, no other reason is worth considering. End quote, Nicholas Darvas. So brilliant, so brilliant, so prescient. There it is, the wisdom from 1959, applicable to 2015. Trend following in a nutshell. Sure, you need a system. But if the market is not going up, nothing is happening. You don't have to have another rationale. You don't have to dream up what the next signal is going to be, what the next prediction is going to be. Someone wrote me the other day. They said, can you send me your favorite indicators, your favorite analysis for predicting where the market will go tomorrow? I wrote back and I said, I have never met anyone that talks about having a way to predict tomorrow. And I've met some of the best traders of the last 50 years. Personally, they never talk about that. The Darvas book intrigued me. I've seen it mentioned throughout social media, forums, blogs, frankly, for the last 20 years. Maybe I was turned off by the title. The title's kind of how I made $2 million in some short amount of time. I just never connected the dots that it was a trend following type thinking. And if I go to the Wikipedia page for Nicholas Darvas, there does seem to be some controversy about how much money he made. Back in 1960, there was an investigation that perhaps the 2 million was not the accurate figure. Hell, we are not going to have any way of figuring that out today. But it's terribly interesting that a self-made man, a self-made individual who is a professional dancer, in his spare time, starting down the path of using fundamentals, listening to tips, listening to brokers, all of the mistakes that people go through, this man made. He made them all in spades. And his book is about those mistakes and leading to a path to where he starts to understand how it all works. Let me quote a passage from the Time magazine article, 1959. Moneyman Darvas's methods would raise the eyebrows of most Wall Streeters. Instead of studying what Wall Street calls the fundamentals, price-earnings ratios, and dividends, he judges public enthusiasm, a method that works best in volatile markets. In my dancing, I know how to judge an audience, he says. It is instinctive. The same way with the stock market. You have to find out what the public wants and go along with it. You can't fight the tape or the public, end quote. You can see the philosophical foundation of trend following. I just find it so damn cool to be sitting here reading an article from 1959, timeless. Absolutely 100% timeless. And such a vast majority of the population would hear Time magazine article 1959, that has no value for me in making money in 2015. They would just dismiss it summarily. We all know those people. Now, just as a side note, that's one of the reasons trend following will always continue to work. Let me continue from the Time magazine article. Darvas' system is tailored to his job, since he has to do trading from wherever he is dancing. He recently completed an Asian tour. He ignores tips, financial stories, and brokers' letters, and has never been in a broker's office. What another great aspect of the lessons that we can learn from 1959 and 2015. Location independence. You can be anywhere. You could absolutely be anywhere to be a trend following trader. It does not matter where you are. I am being 100% dead on speaking the truth. To beat home a point that some of the greatest myths, some of the greatest holy grails of Wall Street, the necessity to be close to the action, the trading floor symbolism, being down in that pit, that's where you need to be. Well, first off, the pit doesn't exist anymore. Point one. Point two, even if you look at one of the most successful pit traders ever, Richard Dennis, and he did make his first $1 million in the Chicago pits, no doubt about it. But the vast majority of his fortune, it was being a trend-following trader off the floor with the turtles. That was where all the money was made. And again, even if you wanted to say, well, Mike, that's great about the trend following, but I like the short term. I like the trading floor. That stuff doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. And are you going to compete against high-frequency traders? Are you going to find server location close enough to the exchanges that you can beat out the other people that are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on infrastructure to trade at the speed of light? I digress. Back to 1959, Time magazine, continuing. Darvas places his buy orders for levels that he considers breakout points on the upside At the same time, he places a stop-loss sell order just below his buy order, so that if the stock does not move straight up after he buys, he will be sold out and his loss cut. I have no ego in the stock market, he says. If I make a mistake, I admit it immediately and get out fast. Darvish thinks his system is the height of conservatism. Says he, if you could play roulette with the assurance that whenever you bet $100, you could get out for $98 if you lost your bet, wouldn't you call that good odds? If he has a big profit in a stock, he puts the stop-loss order just below the level at which a sliding stock should meet support or an exit signal. He bought Universal Controls. I have no idea what stock that is. This is 1959, people. It's probably no longer around. He bought Universal Controls at 18, sold it at 83 on the way down after it had hit 102. I never bought a stock at the low or sold one at the high in my life, says Darvish. I'm satisfied to be along for most of the ride. Damn straight is that trend following. He just sums up trend following, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, right in the solar plexus, right in the gut, one big kick in the ass. There it is, trend following. I'm not even sure why I'm so excited today. I just think it's damn cool to be reading an article from 1959 that's talking about trend following the exact way that I would write about it today. Continuing in Time magazine, the biggest factor in stock prices is the lure of future earnings. The dream of the future is what excites people, not the reality. And there he sums up so nicely why relying on fundamentals is fool's gold. You have a fundamental view about what's going to happen tomorrow? Bullshit. Oh, you might think you have one, but it's bullshit. And deep down, you know it's bullshit. Deep down, you're just trying to sell some other sucker that your fundamental view, your prediction will work. And the selling of the sucker is just a way for you to make money. Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. My name is Mike Covel and I'm trying to make money too. No doubt about that. I'm a capitalist through and through. If they have some description beyond capitalism about making money, I'll put myself there in the truest Ayn Rand sense. And for those of you that hate Ayn Rand, I don't give a shit either. But the bottom line is, if you're going to be a capitalist, if you're going to give people insights, then give them the honest information. And every last person right now today that comes on a finance channel, goes in a finance newspaper, anywhere that can be seen by the public, and purports to know what's going to happen tomorrow is absolutely selling you a dog with a bad heart, a dog with a broken leg. And if you can't control your own emotions enough, if you can't understand that you're being sold the used car, if you can't see that, well, my friends, I have no sympathy for you either. It's the greed and fear thing at work. It's the reason that Darvish's writings, that Darvish's thinking in 1959 will still be applicable today and into the future. It's the reason when I look at AQR's work, or Capital Fund Management's work, or David Harding's work, or Larry Height's work, and all four of those firms that have major trend-following components today in 2015 have written white papers in the last few years describing how trend-following performance goes back centuries. That's centuries with a C, hundreds of years. So I guess by that comparison, the 1959 article in Time magazine about Nicholas Darvish should not have me so excited. A few other great lines from his book. I just jog along with the trend trailing my stop-loss insurance behind me. There are no good or bad stocks. There are only rising and falling stocks. I knew nothing about it, nor could I find out very much. Yet I assumed from its continuing rise in high volume that some people knew a lot more about it than I did. In the same way, I decided that if a usually inactive stock suddenly became active, I would consider this unusual. And if it also advanced in price, I would buy it. I would assume that somewhere behind the out-of-the-ordinary movement, there was a group who had some good information. By buying the stock, I would become their silent partner. What a great way to also reframe the thinking, to reframe what trend following is. You are the silent partner on the trend. You do not know why the smart money is pushing the market or moving the market. You don't know and you don't care. You are the silent partner along for the ride. I just got back from Beijing within the last few weeks. I spoke to over 1,100 people. Check out my monologue about going to China if interested. Not trading related, but gives a great insight into China. One of the things that I talked about with my new friends in China, and this was on June 20th, with the Shanghai index at just about all-time highs, I said, if it keeps going up, buy it. It's in a bull market. Of course, everyone loves that. But in the very next breath, I said, but if it goes down, and you have to know when your going down point is hit. If it goes down and it hits a point, you have to get the blank out. Well, roll forward a few weeks, and the Shanghai is now down 20%. I surely hope some of my new friends in China had an exit strategy, because all the stops were hit. Darvis 101, 1959. Roll forward to 2015. It's all applicable. Nothing changes. People are the same. Life goes on. Just the question becomes is how are you going to play it? How are you going to make it happen? What rules are you going to follow? Or are you going to be at the mercy of the silly talk? You could be all panicky about Greece. What's going to happen with Greece? The end of the world's going to happen. A country of 10 million people is going to bring the entire world of over 7 billion people down to its knees. You can worry about that. You can keep yourself in that place. Don't do that. Don't let yourself. You know why I love watching the Greece story? Not because it affects my investments or trading. I just love watching the chaos. I love watching the circus. I love analyzing the psychology of all of the players, from the man on the street at the ATM to the higher up finance ministers to the various Euro technocrats making decisions. I love watching the entire game in play because it's just one big game. And that's my own little perversion, so to speak. I sure as hell am not going to apply money off any of that analysis, though, because my analysis of all of those events is worth absolutely nothing, just like your analysis of those events is worth absolutely nothing. The only analysis that's worth a damn thing, just like the Shanghai index example that I just mentioned, is the price analysis. If the price is going up, great, you're long. If the price is going down, great, you're either out or you're short. That's it. Yes, it gets a little more complicated than that. Yes, you need rules. You need a complete exit strategy. You need to have a strategy for how you select your portfolio. You're not going to trade every market. You need to have a strategy for how you're going to size your position. How much are you going to bet on every trade? You can't bet unlimited money because you don't have unlimited money. So how much capital are you going to bet of your limited capital? Yeah, you better think that through before you get into the game. The game's always going to be there. So just be patient, get your rules together. For example, read Darvis's book. We all don't have enough time to make all the mistakes that we could possibly make in our lifetime. The smart people avoid making some mistakes and learn from the mistakes of others. That's progress. Now, you can be a little cocky about this. You can be a little egotistical about this. And you can say to yourself that I have to learn all of my mistakes on my own. Well, yes, you can do that. Good luck. Best of luck to you. A few more bullet points from Mr. Darvis, summing up some of his thinking and his lessons. He describes his box technique, which was very similar to a breakout. Number one, this experience, as I see it, was an important turning point of my stock market career, this boxes thinking. Number 2, it was at this point that I finally realized that. Number 3, there is no sure thing in the market. I was bound to be wrong half of the time. Number 4, I must accept this fact and readjust myself accordingly. My pride and ego would have to be subdued. Number 5, I must become an impartial diagnostician who does not identify himself with any theory or stock. Number 6, I cannot merely take chances. First, I have to reduce my risks as far as humanly possible. 1959 is 2015. The circle's unbroken. It's all the same. Good technique then is good technique today. There are many forms of trend following trading. The example that I talk about today with Nicholas Darvas is just one. His box theory. Very similar to a breakout or a Bollinger Band. Very similar. But as I say that, remember, this is about a complete trading approach, not just getting fascinated or excited with some sexy indicator. Please don't do that. But once you have that approach, once you've settled on your system, now the game has really just started. Because once the system is in place, and please go back and listen to my most recent podcast with Ed Sakota, we go straight into the psych issues, the mental issues, the emotional issues. Because once you have that system, whether it's Darvis's trading system or some other trading system, the mind quickly becomes paramount. Your mind, how you handle your daily life. How do you navigate the stresses? How do you navigate the onslaught of information coming at you? That was part of the genius of Darvis, was figuring out a way to block out all of the noise, the extra information, the information that was irrelevant, not important, simply not useful. But this is not easy. The mind game is difficult. One of my favorite voices to offer insights into the mind has never been officially associated with anything to do with trend following trading. Alan Watts introduced Eastern philosophy to the West. And the way that he introduced Eastern philosophy is timeless. You might be saying to yourself, Mike, but I don't want to talk about religion. Guess what? I don't want to talk about religion, and I'm not talking about religion. But as you move into using your trading system, the concept of worry on the mind, will be front and center. But when chaos starts in the world, for example, China dropping 30%, Greece, who knows what comes next? Oh boy, I'm so glad too. It's about time. We need some volatility. We need some chaos. But that classic song with Ginger Rogers, making fun of the whole money thing, knowing that us human beings are responsible, I think it sets the tone for where I want to go today. Because there's ultimately two choices. You can speculate or you can gamble. Before you even get to a trading strategy, and today is a philosophical foundation. And sure, some people will say, I just want to hear the brass tacks. I just want to hear some system discussion today. Well, that's great. Every good trading strategy starts at the philosophical foundation level, speculation or gambling. There is no other choice. Right now, I'm in the middle of a massive project. I'm perusing, going through so many documents, so many books. And just in the last 2 weeks, I've now started to go through books that date back to the 1750s, and many of them into the 1800s as well, early 1900s. I'm telling you, some of these books are just classic. And to an author, they all define speculation versus gambling. Today, I want to share with you some of these excerpts that I think are absolutely timeless And if you can put yourself in the mindset that these authors, these traders were thinking like this back into the 1800s, the exact same issues that we face today in 2015, and here they were facing them in 1883, 1876. I want you to see that what we face today is nothing new. 2015 is not new. Central bank activity, government manipulation, currency this, commodity that, stock indice gone here, gone there. It's not new. The foundation for success, the philosophical foundation for success, I'm going to share today in many of the works that I've been reviewing. Starting with 1876, an excerpt that I like a lot that sets the groundwork. Wall Street dates back to the year 1653, when New York was called New Amsterdam. It was then one of the landmarks of the early Dutch and was sort of a stronghold, a protector against the cupidity of the Indian. Now it is a depository of treasure, a reservoir into which flows 1,000 streams of capital from all parts of the country. The mention of the name Wall Street conjures up ideas of richly filled vaults, of corniced columns of granite and marble, enclosing innumerable caves of Monte Cristo. Nothing the imagination can picture, however, will realize the characteristics of this world-renowned locality. The annals of Wall Street are replete with the most stirring events, far transcending the realms of fiction. It was once a mart for slaves. It is now the financial center of the United States. What's changed since 1876? Not much. But I thought that was a great place to start. We like to all think, hey, everything's different in 2015. What could possibly be useful about a perspective from well over 100 years ago? Quite a bit, as it seems. Now I want to dive into my main course for today, my main direction where I want to go, which is speculation. I absolutely love this word. It is what we should all be striving for. From 1879, an excerpt. In one word, this book may be taken as encouraging speculation by recognizing it. If so, I must accept the consequences without attempting beforehand to defend speculation except on its own apparent merits. That it has merits, all must allow, and the more readily will the value of speculation, its value to the nation, as much as to the merchant be admitted, if my readers will be so good as to separate in their own minds speculation from mere gambling. In the one case, men conduct business with their eyes open, and the other, they rush blindly into operations without considering the pros and cons. This book attempts to show broadly the considerations to which a man's eyes should be open when engaging in such operations, and cannot therefore be accused of encouraging mere gambling. It continues. Fickle as the wind might markets well be called, the occult changes in their course would frighten a stranger, who would not be able to account for half of the fluctuations happening around him. He would abandon calculation, as many a young and at first overconfident young merchant has done, and become a mere gambler, watching results rather than causes. Saying in another way, as I love to say in my trend following world, process versus outcome. So process versus outcome is not some new perspective put in motion in our current day. Here's one author describing it in 1879. We just all fall prey to what's happening in our current world, but our current world is nothing special. Continuing from 1883, there is something fundamentally wrong in the common manner of speculation. There is very little truth in the saying that success is simply luck, for 9 times out of 10, it is the result of study and calculation, or the working of a well-defined rule or plan. There are many thoughtless men who decry all attempts to operate systematically. They say, a child can operate as well as we. Being sarcastic, that's what they say. But judging from the usual results of their transactions, it is evident a child could not do much worse. right there in 1883, defining the cockiness, the psychological imbalance, the ego in play, refusing to operate systematically. People knew, traders knew, investors knew, operating in a systematic fashion was wise in 1883. They knew it in 1783. At least some people knew it. Of course, not everyone knew it. Today, not everyone knows it. But I'm trying to lay the foundation so you can see the lineage of this thinking. Also, in that same work from 1883, a very famous perspective, a very famous early perspective on trend following from the economist David Ricardo. Quote, "Keep down your losses. Never let them get away from you. Let your profits take care of themselves," end quote. That reminded me of a great white paper that I have on my website by Stig Osgaard, one of the turtles, titled "On the Nature and Origins of Trend Following." Here's an excerpt from Stig's work. As one example, consider the economist and trader David Ricardo, who flourished in the London markets from the 1790s until about 1818. A large trader in consols, bonds, and stocks, he accumulated a large fortune from his speculations, which afforded him the leisure to focus on his primary interest in life, economics. Exactly what his methodologies were is not known, but it is to him that one of the most famous sayings in all of trading history is attributed. Quote, "Cut short your losses, let your profits run on," end quote. Stig continues, "This is good advice, no doubt. It has survived to the present time and is expressed often. Still, there is no detail there, no advice on how to cut losses or how to let profits run. And while the first part of the maxim says something about liquidations, nothing is said about initiations. The ending part, however, is a clear exposition of the central tenet of trend following philosophy. As long as the trade is going your way, don't get out." So there you have one of the turtles, taught by Richard Dennis, as well connecting back in his nice white paper on the origins of trend following, connecting back to the 1700s. Seriously, pause for a second and ponder that. The 1700s. It's 2015, people. There should not be relevance to some economist from the late 1700s today, to us. But there is. Because it's timeless. Because human nature is timeless. Human nature doesn't change. Look at China today, reaching a fantastic high and retracing 30% in less than 3 weeks. Now, most of that was most likely just an exit from long positions. I'm sure a lot of it was over-leveraged individual speculators. Oops, not really speculators, gamblers. People that did not have a plan. Nothing special about China. We saw this in America with the NASDAQ. This happens. One other footnote before I continue with some of my excerpts that I've pulled from some of these old works. To Stig Osgaard's point about David Ricardo's statement not being a specific system, well, he's spot on. There's many places you can go find a system, so to speak. If you want to see how one works in action, pick up my Turtle Trader book and you can look at the exact system that Stig Osgaard was taught. But the point of my conversation today is more philosophical. The point of my conversation is to lay out the groundwork, to go back in time and connect all this time. And it's all in the moment of now if you allow yourself to be honest. One last point about Stig. In his footnotes, he refers to where he found the quote from David Ricardo. And I think it was a London book from the 1830s, which I then went and also pulled. Let me read that excerpt. As I have mentioned the name of Mr. Ricardo, I may observe that he amassed his immense fortune by a scrupulous attention to what he called his own 3 golden rules, the observance of which he used to press on his private friends. These were, number 1, never refuse an option when you can get it. Number 2, cut short your losses. Number 3, let your profits run on. By cutting short one's losses, Mr. Ricardo meant that when a member had made a purchase of stock and prices were falling, he ought to resell immediately. And by letting one's profits run on, he meant that when a member possessed stock and prices were rising, he ought not to sell until prices had reached their highest and were beginning again to fall. These are indeed golden rules and may be applied with advantage to innumerable other transactions than those connected with the stock exchange. That is from 1830. I'm pretty sure it's 1830. I don't have the exact date for that one in front of me, but if you call me wrong, I'm almost positive it's 1830. Take the Shanghai Composite. You must let the Shanghai Composite reach its peak, then you exit. When I spoke in Beijing a few weeks ago, I made this exact point. We were looking at that time before the correction. I said, buy the Shanghai today. Why not? But have a tight stop. Be prepared to get out. Have your plan. But don't be afraid of the all-time high. Just have a stop. Have an exit. Be ready to get out. David Ricardo saying the same damn thing all the way back to the 1700s. Back to my speculation philosophical foundation, 1887, another excerpt. As I have pointed out in another chapter, speculation is a business that must be studied as a specialty. And though it is popularly believed that any man who has money can speculate, yet the ordinary man without special training in the business is liable to make as great a mistake in this attempt is the man who thinks he can act as his own lawyer and who is said to have a fool for a client. The common delusion that expert knowledge is not required in speculation has wrecked many fortunes and reputations in Wall Street and is still very influential in its pernicious and illusory achievements. 1887. I don't think I need to keep beating the drum about why it's all connected, but damn, is it connected? I just think it's cool. It's so awesome to read these old works and your perspective just changes. We're nothing more than a flea in the markets in one fleeting year, and our time will pass on, and unless humanity extincts itself in some way, global thermonuclear war or an asteroid like the dinosaurs got knocked out on, unless that happens, I guarantee you 100 years from now, all of these precepts will be exactly relevant. Nothing will change. The key is, what are you going to do with your life and the limited time that you have on this planet right now? 1888, another excerpt. Then in theory, it is so easy to win by speculation. To buy at a low figure and sell at a high figure, or to sell at a high figure and afterward buy at a lower figure, seems such a simple operation. It almost looks as if you could go into Wall Street and pick up money from the sidewalks. Just, they've even got the damn sarcasm. That's what I love about this old writing. This old writing was written like cowboys. There was absolutely no bullshit. There was no desire to care for the emotional well-being of some namby-pamby who needs his hand held, or someone that's living on a bailout, whether it's a personal bailout or a corporate bailout. There was none of that. It was speculation and gambling, and if you're going to speculate, you better have rules, and if you don't have good rules, then you're sure as shit a gambler. Continuing, 1906. This was in the side margin of a book on speculation. Quote, so great are the opportunities offered by speculative changes that, with proper methods and self-control, the poor man cannot afford to overlook them. The poor man cannot afford to overlook them. It's the inspiration as well, too, because he's saying clearly, you don't have to be poor. What's Jack Ma's famous line, the head of Alibaba, the largest internet company in China? I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially, if you're poor at the age of 35, it's your fault. You want it to be poor. If you're poor by the age of 35, you want it to be poor. Because you really didn't smoke it and push hard between the ages of 18 and 35. That's his point. He did. Now, we're not all going to be Jack Ma. Not everyone's going to get the massive lottery-like winnings, but you sure as shit can make your first million. Continuing from that same excerpt, the public attitude towards speculation is generally hostile. Even those who venture frequently are prone to speak discouragingly of speculative possibilities and to point warningly to the fact that an overwhelming majority of speculative commitments result in loss, while those who venture not at all and consequently are incompetent to judge dismiss the subject with a statement that marginal trading is gambling, pure and simple, and is therefore pernicious. 1906, over 100 years ago, telling all of these critics on the sideline, you're immaterial. So blunt, so direct. The language doesn't leave you an out. You make a choice. You either do or don't do. It's not even saying if you don't do, you're necessarily a bad person or you're going to be unsuccessful or whatnot. But it's saying speculation and gambling, it's a freaking choice. It's a very direct choice. And you have to decide. One last older excerpt, and then I'm going to move it forward to current day. 1911. I think the chapter title was The Science of Speculation. 1911, The Science of Speculation. Call it what you will, speculation will always be with us. Prudes may frown upon it. Superficial thinkers may confuse it with the commonest forms of gambling, and sociologists may dream of the day when envy, ambition, and covetousness will be a thing of the past, and the human race can exist in peace without these human traits. But their agitations and outcries can no more check speculation than human ingenuity can devise a scheme to control the tides. What the blood is to the human body, speculation is to business. It is an absolutely necessary part of it. The only difference, if there is at all a difference, is in the form it assumes. What would business be without incentive? In fact, incentive is all there is at the bottom of speculation. Men are willing to take risks to acquire wealth. They are willing to stake their capital upon opportunities which appeal to their judgment. From the pioneer who heedlessly plunges into a trackless waste to find a new home with greater opportunities for the acquisition of wealth, to the modern capitalist who, to control the trade in a given commodity, plans gigantic trust, is a long line of speculators, as speculation is behind all of their ambitions. The inventor, who is apparently of all men the least of speculators, takes greatest speculative chances, for he uses up time and energy to shape his ideas into some form where they can be of practical use, and should he fail, has wasted them utterly and lost all. Illustration could be given to demonstrate how speculation, in a greater of less degree, enters into the material welfare of each individual. Without speculation, no business could progress. It is the dynamic power behind every incentive to activity and progress. It is the desire for gain which prompts the inception of every venture. If it is at all that, then it can be readily seen how necessary speculation is. In fact, speculation in its highest form has shaped the course of history and often changed the map of the world. Wow, that's a nice piece of writing, isn't it? From around 1995, I think that's when this was first published, 1995 to 1997. I could be wrong. It definitely came out for sure in the Winton Papers by David Harding in 2005 at the latest. Consider. Speculare, the Latin root of the verb to speculate, has the literal meaning to observe. And a study of speculation will show that the most successful speculators can be well described as observers. To be successful, this observation must of necessity be detached and unemotive, and thus, where great social and moral issues are at stake, it is perhaps not surprising that this viewpoint should arouse some distrust and hostility among the general population, particularly when the speculator profits at a time of general discontent. Yet this detached observation is clearly in the spirit of the natural scientist, and the act of speculating for money is in the spirit of the empirical scientist, restless yearning to add to empirical knowledge and put theories to test. Thus, making money from mathematical models is in one sense less about corruption of intellectual endeavor than about the appropriate statistical test of the utility of such models for the development of scientific theory. It's pretty easy to see that the most successful trend-following trader today, David Harding, and it will surely change in the future as these things always change, but it's pretty easy to see that David Harding's influence, his philosophical foundation, his philosophical underpinnings, before he even gets to his buy, sell, position sizing, his portfolio selection, before he gets to any of that, and that's not the subject of this particular podcast, before he gets to any of that, his philosophical foundation is absolutely rooted in the many works that I excerpted today from the 1800s. Now, sadly, in 2015, as I go back and I have these fond recollections and look at all this great writing from the 1800s and the early 1900s, sadly today, speculation for many people is a dirty word. It's an awful dirty word. It's just a bad thing. I want to insert at this point a few-minute clip from the American president, FDR. This was given in his State of the Union address, January 11th, 1944. Now consider what he says in these few minutes in the context of how I've talked about speculation today, reaching back through the centuries to define speculation as a good thing, as a logical thing, as the only thing to get ahead, as the thing that leads human progress. Before we even get to trading, it leads human progress. Consider FDR.
In our day, certain economic truths have become accepted as self-evident. A second Bill of Rights, under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station or race or creed. Among these are the right to a useful and remunerative job, the right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation, the right of every farmer to raise and sell his products at a return which will give him and his family a decent living, the right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom, freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad, the right of every family to a decent home, the right to adequate medical care and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health, the right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment, the right to a good education.
To recite some of those, the right to a useful and profitable job, the right to earn enough, the right of every farmer to raise and sell his products at a decent living, the right of every family to have a decent home, the right to adequate medical care, the right to adequate protection from economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment, the right to a good education. I see speculation and what FDR talks about in conflict. Now you might be saying to yourself, but Michael, this is FDR in 1944. Who cares today? With all due respect, I watched an hour-long presentation of Bernie Sanders the other day. Bernie Sanders is asking for a lot more than FDR was asking for in 1944. I'm not trying to make a political statement here. I'm simply pointing out that speculation and the FDR Bernie Sanders team are in conflict. It's an obvious conflict. I will add, too, that when I watched this Bernie Sanders presentation before 10,000 people in an overflowing gym, none of them looking poor or destitute, you really start to have to wonder how we went from being in a situation where we want to take care of the very bottom of those that can't take care of themselves, to where the state apparatus now just takes care of so many, perhaps even more than a majority. Why the political insert at the end of this podcast episode? I bring it back to speculation. If the notion of speculation is exciting to you, if the idea of speculation seems logical, it seems like, wow, I've got a philosophical grounding to move forward. Now that I have my philosophical foundation, I see where I sit in terms of speculation. I know speculation is an honorable pursuit. Now I have my rules. Now I can go forward. Well, it's fantastically optimistic to see so many people not caring about speculation, so many people that have tuned out, so many people that only think their way to make it is to be in a gym listening to one man running for political office as their speculative savior. Because that's why they're there. They're speculating that this particular politician, and I don't care right or left, everyone is speculating that a particular politician will save them. I say, go back to the old masters. Go back to the writings of the 1800s. Look at the solid thinking of these very smart men that came hundreds of years before us. Don't pay attention to the distractions of the day. The philosophical foundation, that's the starting point. You must have that to move on to any form of trading success, and especially trend following trading success. The third monologue coming at you, simplicity trumps complexity. Today is my effort at curation. There is absolutely so much out there. You start to wonder, if you don't have a foundation, if you're not grounded, or if you don't have a technique in figuring out right from wrong, up from down, left from right, if you don't have a system for getting through all of the noise, well, it can be overwhelming. I mean, go to YouTube. YouTube is fantastic. There are so many brilliant lectures on YouTube, so many smart people on YouTube. Now, of course, on YouTube, there is equal parts, just massive noise to keep you distracted and not going the right direction. My opening brief clip today from magician Penn Jillette of Penn and Teller fame. I love this guy. He is a super smart thinker. It's all about reason and rationality. And whether you're going to trade, be an entrepreneur, a businessman, anyone that is going to achieve and move the ball forward, you need to figure out a way to spot bullshit. And typically, bullshit starts with feelings.
Is that whenever someone uses what they feel as evidence instead of what they think as evidence or what they can prove as evidence, I'm very skeptical. The most important thing is to feel about things you feel about, should feel about, and think about things you should think about.
As I said, I'm just a huge fan of Jillette. That type of thinking just grabs you. And of course, there's a ton of videos on him online. Check those out for sure. But I just thought that'd be a great opening, small, brief segment of where I want to go today. Next, Gerd Gigerenzer. Gerd has appeared on my show twice. He's got a fantastic book called Risk Savvy, many other works. When you first come into trading, risk analysis is paramount. But how do you think about risk? What is risk? How do you measure risk? Even some of the brightest people out there, the wealthiest, the greatest academic credentials, still do not know what risk is or how to define it. Listen closely to Gigerenzer.
In the good old times, people learned how to read and to write. That's no longer sufficient in the high-tech 21st century. We also need to know how to deal with risk and uncertainty. And that is what I mean with risk savvy. Here's a simple example. You hear on the weather report that there's a 30% chance of rain tomorrow. 30% chance of what? Now, I live in Berlin, and most Berliners believe that it means that it will rain in 30% of the time, that is 7 to 8 hours. Others think it will rain in 30% of the region. Most New Yorkers believe that's all nonsense. It means it will rain on 30% of the days for which this prediction has been made. That is, most likely, not at all. Many psychologists think that people can't learn how to deal with risk. But in this case, it's the experts, the meteorologists, who have not learned how to communicate risk in an understandable way. That is to say, to what class the 30% refers. Time, or region, or days. And if you have some imagination, you can think about other classes. For instance, one woman in New York said, I know what 30% means. 3 meteorologists think it rains, and 7 not. Now, getting soaked is a minor risk. But are we risk savvy when it comes to more important things? For instance, 20-year-olds drive with their cell phone glued to their ears, not realizing that they decrease their reaction time to that of a 70-year-old. Or many Americans, about 20%, believe that they are in the top 1% income group, and as many believe they will soon be there. Or take health. So about an estimated 1 million children get every year unnecessary computed tomography, CT scans. Unnecessary because they're not really clinically indicated, which is not just a waste of time, but also danger to the kids, because a CT scan can have the radiation of 100 chest X-rays and may lead in a small number of these kids later to cancer. We deal every day with risks, but we haven't learned how to understand them. And the problem is not simple in the human mind, but also in experts who either don't know what the risks are or don't know how to communicate them, or in other areas, like if it's about finance or health, have interests other than yours. So the key message is this: everyone can learn to deal with risks. In that case, everyone can learn to ask the question, probability of what? And second, if you believe that you're safe by delegating the responsibility of your wealth and health to experts, then you may be disappointed, because many experts do not know how to communicate probabilities or try to protect themselves against you, as in healthcare, as a potential plaintiff. So you have to think yourself. And that's the key message.
It's worth noting about Gerd Gigerenzer, David Harding supports his academic work. The trend follower, David Harding, who I'm very fond of, who I think has done a fantastic job of leading and pushing forward the trend following message, he is a big supporter of Gerd Gigerenzer. If you've not read Gerd's works, if you've not gone ahead and listened to his podcasts on my show, it's about time. Get moving. But I think what's really important about that Gerd clip is it gets you thinking about process. So now we've got the discussion of risk underway. And let's say we're talking about a trading system. But a trading system is more than just trust. You have to turn the knobs, so to speak. You have to get down and do the dirty work. You can't just trust. You can take a great trading approach from somebody else. You can take a system from somebody else. And that's how Everyone learns. That's how you start. But then you have to start testing. You have to start turning the knobs. There's an extremely strong philosophical foundation behind the idea of turning the knobs and testing. Consider this piece from another favorite of mine, another favorite philosopher, Daniel Dennett. And if you've not read Daniel Dennett's works, please go today and buy, I think it's called Intuition Pumps. Buy that book today. Consider Dennett's wisdom.
If there's a gadget and you want to know what it does, turn the knobs, see what happens, see what the moving parts do. So I encourage everybody to not just to take an intuition pump as it's handed to them, but look at the moving parts, see what makes it tick. Try to figure out, what if I adjust this? Will it still pump the same intuition? Will it still yield the same putative conclusion, or will the whole thing fall apart? And it's interesting to see that a lot of times philosophers will make an intuition pump which seems to do great work until you start turning the knobs, and then you realize that it actually depends on your not thinking clearly about some aspect of the problem. Then you've exposed it as not a good intuition pump, but as actually a sort of negative one. I call them boom crutches because they explode in your face.
It's about your curiosity. You have to want to know how it works. Just sitting back and just trusting, whether it's me or anyone, no, that's not good enough. You want to get under the hood. You want to see how it works conceptually. That's part of the magic of your success. If you're not under the hood, if you're not turning the knobs, if you're not seeing, well, if I turn too far this way on risk, if I go this way on my entry parameter, that's too much. But where is that nice, robust place, that space, so to speak, that statistical space where you can sit? And one step to the left, you don't fall off. One step to the right, you don't fall off. A nice, broad foundation. That's what you're looking for. And to find that, you got to turn the knobs. I'm going to add in a very long clip now from the 1980s, about 40 minutes, from Richard Feynman. Brilliant man, exceptionally smart at breaking down complicated issues too simple. And what he does in this 45-minute clip is explain from a mid-1980s perspective, which frankly is timeless when you listen to him. I wouldn't play it if it wasn't timeless. How a computer works, the logic behind it, the philosophy behind it. So many people today know it's smart to be systematic when it comes to their trading. They know that a computer can be a fantastic tool to keep track of what they're doing. But with so much talk of singularity, so much talk of machine learning, so much talk of there's going to be an AI robot walking across the table tomorrow. That stuff could happen in the future. But guess what? Today, Feynman is right. It's a file cabinet, and it goes fast. And that fast file cabinet is the secret to trend following success. You can run that file cabinet on a piece of paper with a pencil if you so desire. But the file cabinet in a computer allows you to go quicker. A great long-form presentation from Richard Feynman.
I'd like to compare it to a filing system. As a matter of fact, I'll anticipate the end. A computer is a high-class, super-speed, nice, streamlined filing system. And I'm going to start out with an ordinary old-fashioned business filing system and to tell you ways that you can change it and improve it and so forth until it becomes a computer. One of the miseries of life is that everybody names things a little bit wrong. And so it makes everything a little harder to understand in the world than it would be if it were named differently. Computer does not primarily compute in the sense of doing arithmetic. Strange. Although they call them computers, that's not what they primarily do. They primarily are filing systems. People in the computer business say they're not really computers, they're data handlers. All right, that's nice. Data handlers would be a better name because it gives a better idea of the idea of a filing system. There's a lot of data on cards, and you handle it. You take cards out, look at them, put them back, and so on. So that's what the computer does, and I'm going to describe first an old-fashioned filing system, and then we'll talk about how it's improved, or how it might be improved, okay? Actually, it's improved to the point of being made automatic and mechanical, electrical, actually, and that's our computer. And an old-fashioned filing system is something that many of you are perhaps even unfortunately familiar with. It's a whole lot of boxes, drawers of cards and things, you know, which all have stuff, numbers, and facts on them. For example, in a business which has lots of salesmen, it may be that each salesman has a card. He has his name on it and his address, what his general salary is, what his commission rate is, how much he sold last month, and where he lives, things like that, let's suppose. And it's written on lots of cards because there's lots of salesmen in the boxes. And then the problem for a file clerk might be, for example, a boss comes in and says, would you figure out, oh, the commission rate is given on the card, like a certain percentage, and how much he sold during the month. But now you have to figure out how much we have to pay him. So what you do is you take out a card, and you look at how much he sold that month, and you look at his commission rate, and you multiply the two numbers, and you write it on the card, and put it back, and do this on card after card, okay? What does it mean? So you're taking a card, then you're looking at some things, and doing something to them, that is looking at some data on the card. The easiest way to think of it, to simplify it just a little bit, is that we have scrap paper that we can erase and use again and use again. So we take and rewrite the numbers off the card, the amounts, before, so when we're doing the multiplication, we can do it with the numbers without dirtying up the card. So we copy the numbers over, and then do the calculation, see the answer, and if the rule is to put the result back on this man's card, okay, so we write it on this card. It may be that we would like to put this on some other card, maybe cards about expenses that have to be paid or something, you see? So you'd put that somewhere else. Or perhaps, to make another example, that you would like to add together all, well, I'll forget that. You want to add together all the money to know how much you're going to have to pay out. That's another example. But they're all the same, of course, that you take the numbers from the cards and write them down and recalculate and put it back in the numbers. So you have three kinds of operations. Taking cards from places, looking at information on the card, doing something to the information on the card, writing things on the card and putting the cards back. Okay? Actually, it could be a little bit simpler. You could say you take the thing out and take the information off the card, immediately put the card back. Just save it. Now you do the calculation, and when you get the answer, you pull a particular card out that what you want to put the answer on. It may be the same man's card, but wherever you want to put the answer, you take it out, write it down, and put it back. Okay? So we have two operations: picking up a particular card, getting data off of it, doing something to it, and then putting numbers onto cards from our scrap paper on different cards. And that's all that the file clerk does. To take another example, suppose we have figured out all the amount of money that we owe each salesman, and we would like to know how much to draw out of the bank in total. So we need the total amount of all the sales. Then we could do that by having a special card called a total card and writing 0 on there. And this is a way of I'm talking about the details of what we have to do. Everybody knows what to do. You tell the file clerk to add the numbers, but this is what you might do, or he. Was write 0 on this particular thing called total sales costs in California, and do the following. Then you take the first salesman card, you look, he's not from California. We want the total amount of money we have to spend in California salesmen, all right? Just as an example. So you put that one back. Take the next card. Is it from California? No, put it back. Next card, from California, yes. Then the next instruction is to look at how much money you owe this man and write that by adding to what's on the total card. You take the number that's on the total card and the number that's on this man's card, add them together, and write that back onto the total card, right? You're keeping the total running, see? So the next time when you take another card that has a number on it, You take the new total that you just cooked up from before. There was no trouble last time. You had to add 0, but this time it's getting harder. You add it on and put the sum back on the total card. So you see you got a kind of a steady thing. And when you're all done going through all the file, the total has been changed and changed and changed and changed, and the last thing you read is the real total of all the numbers. Okay? That's what the file clerk might do in that situation. And now we're going to try to improve the filing system, to improve it. You see, we have to have a fairly intelligent file clerk, a file clerk that can multiply and add and so on, read cards, get instructions from the boss and remember what they are, naturally, and know how to do all these things. Has to know where to go to run up and down and pick the cards out of the boxes, and has to read the place to find the cards and know where they are, and so on. It's a lot of stuff. Well, another one comes along. We got a new file clerk. I got a new file clerk for you. Say to the 5 times faster than the old one. Oh, well, we'll hire him. But you discover suddenly that he doesn't know how to do multiplication. Well, how in the hell is he going to handle finding the commissions by multiplication? This guy isn't any good. But he's 5 times faster, so it's very tempting. If we can only get him to be able to multiply. So what do? You send him to school? Too much wasted time. Better idea. You teach him you tell him how to multiply as follows. After all, he's very fast at picking up cards and putting them down. So he takes the cards and he looks at, say, 2 numbers. And you tell him to look at the last end of the number. One's an 8 and one's a 7. Right? Then that instruction will look at card number 78 in the multiplication file. And card number 78 in the multiplication says 56. The multiplication table, which we worked so hard to learn in school, is easy to put on a set of cards. On each card, which is labeled by a number, let's say the card number 78 or 78. The card label, I don't have to convert it to a number, a card called multiply 78. Answer 16. It is written on a card. So all he has to do is pick up the right card. He's very good at that, and he's very fast, see? So he sees the 78, take the card, 56, okay? And so it goes. He doesn't have to know how to multiply. You tell him a series of instructions, what to do exactly. You give him the instructions as to which cards to look for at what time. So when you say multiply, you don't even tell him that. You tell him, look in this box now, take that card out and write down what that one says, and so on. So you see that we can describe multiplication as a definite procedure, a precise procedure of handling numbers in a kind of a dumb way, and things that would have to be memorized are never a problem. Memorization is no problem. That's what a filing system is for. That's what cards are for. We write everything on the cards. Every damn thing you've learned for all this effort is written on a card. So with cards, we can make this fast filing clerk actually able to multiply. Of course, it's slower to have to look up each time in the multiplication table, because he has no memory worth a damn for numbers, this guy. So he can't even remember that he's used the 7 times 8 55 times, but he still has to look it up again. So he's slower in the sense of the number of operations to multiply than the original file clerk was. But he's really faster, because altogether he handles the cards so much faster that in spite of the fact that if there's a lot of multiplication problems, he isn't 5 times faster than the other clerk, but he might be 2 times faster because he's slowed up in the process of multiplication. So our filing clerk does not have to know how to multiply. Well, we'll get a faster one. I got another one that's 10 times faster than the last one. He can't add. No problem, right? I mean, we have an adding table too, right? No problem. Okay, he's easy. He's better. He can't add, he can't multiply, can't handle numbers at all. But he can compare, read, and check that what it says on the cards is the same. He doesn't even know that these are numbers. He sees this shape and compares it to this shape and takes the cards out according to the instructions, okay? Now, where does he get his instructions? They're in a series of cards that says, do this, then do this, then do this, you see. So we have a sequence of cards with instructions on them. He doesn't even have to remember the instructions. He's rather stupid. The first filing clerk, you could say, go get the card. That instruction meant go into room 5, open the drawer, push your fingers through the card, lift, and so forth, okay? So if you want to get the card to read it and then carry it back and write it down, you could have a list of instructions for this idiot. Instead of saying get the card, you say, look in these set of instructions, please. First instruction, walk over to the file. Second, pull out the drawer. And so forth. So all he has to do is keep track of which instruction comes after which. He's really quite stupid, but man, is he fast. Dumber, but faster. Okay, the key of it all is dumber, but faster. Right? And so what we're having is filing systems with ever-increasing speed of the file clerk, but ever stupider file clerks. Okay, and they're getting better as systems because we must file everything. Now, the last fellow that we've got in this, not the last one, but the next to the last one, is unable to remember which instruction he's on. Well, what's the next instruction? Oh, but he can add 1. He knows how to change something with 1. He has a little counter that he pushes a button and it goes up 1, okay? So all he has to remember is the following. Push the button on there's a little register that he can read, okay? It's a push, that we call it the program counter or instruction count, all right? Push the button that changes the instruction count by 1. That's the only button he knows how to push. Push that, okay? That's the first instruction. Read the number there on the program counter and take that card out, that instruction number out. Okay? And that says go get this paper or transfer this or whatever it is, you see? Because we have already put all the instructions in a certain order. And then put the card back, you're finished. Take out, read the instruction, and do the instruction, and put the card back, okay? Then the next cycle he has, push the button on the program counter, read the program counter. It's the next number, you know. But he couldn't remember, so he has it there. It's the next card. Takes the next card out, and it tells him what to do next, and so on, okay? So he doesn't even have to remember where he's at, as long as he's got this one little gadget inside, which I'm beginning to think you could see could be done mechanically. That is, we can make a device that all you push a button and the number changes by 1, right? In fact, so that that's almost got it, but we find a very much faster, 10 times faster than this marvel, who is so stupid, but so fantastically fast, which is 10 times faster than this fellow, but he can't read letters. He doesn't know what they mean, doesn't know what the numbers mean, okay? So how is he gonna, what can he do? If he can't read anything, he can't do anything. I grant you that, I grant you that, right? But he can distinguish 2 signs, one from the other, which we'll call high and low, or black and white, or 1 and 0, or mark and no mark, whatever. All right, just he only can read not any kind of letter, but just one little spot. It's let's say we always make it red and blue. You see, is it red or is it blue? So we make a lot of spots for him, red, blue spots. It's all he can read. What an idiot! How can we make him do anything? How can he know what an A is? Suppose we got letters. We want to write the letters for names or something like that. So we would like to instruct him in the letters for the names, you see. So instead of saying, we tell him which, first better, to give a better example. By this time, because they have to use so many cards and so many files, the files have gotten larger, right? There are lots of filing cabinets in many rooms all over, and this poor fool has to be able to find the right cabinet. Now, previously, we labeled all the cabinets with the names of the sections from schmaltz to zoology and so forth here, and this is in box 34, and this is all over. It's like that places in Esalen have numbers on them and so forth. I'll show you how we could do that without having, only with red and blue dots on the rooms for those particular kind of workshop people who cannot read numbers, all right? And we'll still be able to do it, and I'll show you how we'll do it. Let's do it with the Esalen rooms. It just makes it more interesting. I don't propose this as a practical device, but perhaps it is. And it goes as follows. You take the map, and you divide the rooms through the middle, and say, these are the first level red and blue rooms, okay? Then you take the red rooms, and divide them in half. Let's say those are the higher part of the hill and the lower part, and say they are secondary red or blue. And the blue ones, the main blue ones, have been divided into primary and secondary rooms, like this. So I see that I don't have red and blue, so I'll use brown and orange. It's perfectly all right. Had I said brown and orange, it would be all right. They understand that it could be any two colors. Okay, so let's first draw, what, in yellow? A lot of rooms. Can't see the rooms, okay? I don't have enough things. So these are the rooms. We'll be all right. Let's say we had this many rooms. I've got them all laid out in a straight line, but it doesn't make any difference where they are on the map, right? We got 8 rooms. I know you got more rooms than 8 rooms, but you'll see the scheme will work just as well for any number of rooms. So what we're going to do is we're going to mark all these rooms with a black dot as a first dot. I mean a brown one, all right? And these will get orange dots, okay? Now, of the brown dotted rooms, we think of the brown dotted rooms and we look at the next dot, which says the first half of them get brown on that dot, and the second half of those get orange, all right? And then the first half of these get brown, and the second half gets orange. Oh, you say, well, still you're so clear. Okay, now you look at the brown rooms, huh? Any pair, there's a brown, the brown-orange rooms, the orange-brown rooms, and the orange-orange rooms. Of the brown rooms, we label this side ones brown as the first. Each pair gets the front end brown, and the other one gets orange. And lo and behold, we got 8 rooms, and with 3 little dots, each of which can only have one of 2 colors, we can identify the room. So the guy who has to locate himself and who can't read numbers, but can read whether a dot is brown or orange, will, in this system, be very easy to find his unique room. In fact, it's easy to find the room, which is different, of course, as you already know the numbers on these rooms around here do not locate the rooms, right? But this new system, we can locate the rooms. The first brown tells us to kind of go over here somewhere. The next brown, swap more. Is it orange? Take that side. So the filing cabinets can be very large and have labels on them, which are like these brown dots and orange dots, but because instead of being 8, there are, say, 1,000 such rooms, it turns out you only need 10 dots to do it. 1,000,000 such rooms, there's only 20 dots. Because there's so many different combinations of brown, orange, brown for 20 long. So many ways in 1,000,000 different ways. So you'd have, that way you can label a large number of different cabinets and have a file clerk which you can only read just one of 2 alternatives and make sense of it. And so we can do it with rooms and also with the letters of the alphabet, because we take the letters of the alphabet and write them along and label them. The letters on this side of the alphabet are the brown letters, first primary brown, and the others are orange, and out of those you make brown. So these could have been A, B, C, D, E, F, you know. So we could teach him a different way to write his alphabet. He's so dopey. He can only read these, but we, smart enough, to convert it. So he can be therefore using names and numbers, but they're written in a different code. It's like the dot-dash system of Morse, only slightly more organized. We call it ones and zeros. Brown and orange, I'm calling it. Whatever. You can only read 2 possible things, okay? So the new file clerk can only make out one of 2 alternatives at any particular spot. Of course, he has to realize he's do first the first one, and then he's up to the second one. So he first makes one choice, and then the next choice, and next choice, and according with this, and then determines the letter of the alphabet. If he has to talk to us and make an output, he's not going to be able to just put these ones and zeros. We're not going to be able to read it. So suppose he wants to say something, and he wants to put an output. You ask him for the name of the best-selling, the guy who sold the most in California, and he does it with his dots, and I'll tell you a little more about how you do that. And comes out, his name starts with an A, say, or let's say it starts with a C. Huh? Where is the C? For him, it's 3 dots and a dash, right? But he wants to print C for you. What can you do? He wanted to see it look like a C. You know? So what we have done for him is we imagine he's going to write this on some kind of a screen that we have divided into squares, okay? Like this. I should make more. And we tell him whether to mark the square or not in the electronic device with a pulse so it lights up on the screen or not, by whether it's a brown or an orange dot there. So we put a brown dot here. Well, let me first draw the C. The C is going to look like this is where the orange dots go. Okay, there's a C, all right? Not a very good C, but it's a C. If you had more dots and a finer screen, it would make a much better C. So we put all these browns and so on, and then we put into a filing cabinet, under the labeling for the third letter of the alphabet, this pattern. So when he's not working internally, which is, you can use this other system, but wants to communicate with us, we've told him how to do it. What we get for a C, by putting in the filing cabinet the list of dots that he's supposed to put out on the screen. So when he's finished looking at, we look at the little white dots and black areas, we see a shape of a C. So the hardest thing he has is communicating with us, getting the information, converting it to dots, and getting the dots back to the form that we're used to. The same thing can be done with numbers, of course. Suppose that he had only deal with numbers from 1 to 1,020, 0 to 1,023. It's a happy case where you can divide. 10 times you can divide those in half. You say a number is described by the same bunch of dots by taking the top half of the numbers or the bottom half of the numbers. I already did it with numbers. It was the numbers on the rooms. So we can use these dots and so forth to represent numbers the same way. And now we can use a particularly stupid file clerk, and it's only useful, of course, if he's really very fast, because everything requires him to looking in his damn files all the time because he knows so little. And that's what ultimately has been developed. First of all, in order to get up speed, instead of having to get up and walk over to the file, we put the files not on cards but on little tape decks, little tape decks, electrical. And we send the signal, turn on the tape deck and listen to the signal that comes on. We don't have to run over there. We've got a telephone, so to speak. We tell which one to go off, then it sends back what's on that tape. So you see that we can file things not on pencil and paper, but with electrical signals or magnetic, different kinds of techniques there are for electrically saving information. And it turns out you can do that smaller and smaller until the filing cabinet is this big, which contains millions of items. And what you're doing is you're signaling to the different filing cabinets. Depending upon the ones and zeros, there are switches inside that tells which one it goes to. And the information comes in and out electrically. That's much faster than carrying cards around and running around in sneakers. And so that's the way that's done. And by the time we got a file clerk this stupid, we can do it mechanically. We can tell whether two dots are the same. For instance, we can ask him, when the two look the same, do this. So if there's two brown ones or two orange ones, do this. Now, it's rather easy to make mechanical devices which will do things like that. For example, instead of brown and orange dots, you could have electrical voltages, which are either up or down. There's current on or there isn't. So instead of a dot of different colors, we just have a voltage or no voltage on a particular wire at a given moment. Or if you would like, but this isn't the way the electrical one is the way it's done. But if you would prefer, you could imagine you made a hydraulic computer with pipes, with pressure, with water going through. And if you look at the pipe and water's squirting out, that's a black dot. And if there's no water there, that's the other kind. So it's rather easy. So you make the pipes go squirt, squirt, not squirt. Squirt, squirt, not squirt. That's it. This one is this room. Right? Now what we need is a situation to compare things that only squirts if two things. Let's suppose we were looking for both dots be brown. Only then should you make a brown dot. In other words, two pipes such that if both pipes have water in them, then only then should water come out the other one. Well, we need only a valve operated by water. You have a pipe like this with a valve. which is a thing you do. Turn it on, let the water through. The water's trying to go through here. It's turned off by a faucet, which only takes a small turn and has sticking out above it, instead of an ordinary handle, a flat vein, okay, that we're going to squirt with water, and that's going to push the vein around and open the valve. So here is the things coming in with the water to operate that. So when the water goes here, it turns the water on there. Now if I put two such valves in succession in the pipe, okay, and I had the water coming in these two different pipes, then it would only work, that is, water will only come out of here if both of these pipes are squirting. Because if I got only one pipe squirting and the other not, this valve is off, but this on, so water don't get through on account of that's in the way. And vice versa, okay? So this is what you call an AND. You get result here when both this and that are on, then you get that on. You can do an OR just as well, where you get a result if either one is on, but that's different kind of a logic. And the way to do that is simple enough, is to arrange the pipes so that the water that's coming in is split into two possible pipes. Let me see how I draw this. Yes, well, the brown and the orange is just an accident of fate of having put the orange cap on the brown gadget. So we'll straighten that out right now. And here we go. The pipes go like this. The input is here, but we go with the two valves this way. Here's the one with the other valve, okay? And the two squirters. Let's say this one squirts here and this one squirts here. You got to get some geometry. It's three-dimensional. You got to get this pipe on top of this pipe, or there'll be trouble. Anyway, the idea is that these then come together, and you might ask, under what circumstances does water come out of there? Well, clearly, if either this is open or that's open, it either goes around this way or it goes around this way, or both. That's an OR. You get junk out only when one or the other or both is on. And so we can say very simple comparisons of these dots, or better, ones and zeros, or pressure, water and no water, or electricity and no electricity, voltage or no voltage, electrons or no electrons. And so we can make the device simple enough now that we don't need a human being anymore to do the file work, and the whole system is now a computer. It's all done electrically, and it has this kind of switches in it. Electrical valves are called transistors, and how they work in detail, how the electrons come in here affect the electrons going there, I won't describe. But just granting that a transistor is the analog of a valve, but for electric current, then you're going to understand that large numbers of transistors, lots of these valves making comparisons, switching where the current goes to find the right filing place in the box where all the stuff is filed and so forth, would constitute a computer, and that all a computer does is what a filing cabinet system can do. It can do everything that most things that an ordinary file clerk system can do. It can multiply numbers because we store the numbers. We store the combinations. It can add. It can do all these things, even though it can hardly do anything. And you might ask, is there some kind of design of computers that can do more than other kinds of computers? And the answer is no. It turns out, once you begin to understand this, that if you try to add more complicated things, you can always put them back in filing systems and use the same system to do a more elaborate thing. So all the computers can do the same things, but maybe they take longer, or it may be a matter of efficiency, but they can all do the same things. They're all universal inside, if they're big enough. Their limitations are how big is your filing system. Maybe there's not enough room for all the cards you want to put in, and things like that. But that's the only differences between the different machines. At any rate, that is supposed to be an expose of what the heck's inside the machine. Now let's ask what such a machine could do. First of all, the same machinery can be used for more than one problem by just having different instructions. Lists of instructions, what to do this, then that, to do that, to deep. And another problem, you do something entirely different. This might have been a business with salesmen and so on, and now you want to do oil company reports and listings of what they discover when they drill, all right? So all new numbers, all new instructions of how to handle numbers, everything. What do? Buy another filing system. It's more expensive to do that than to do the following. throw away all the cards from the business company. Wait a minute, suppose you want to come back and, all right. Take everything that's on the cards of the business company and make photocopies and store them in the basement. Now erase all the cards. So if you want to come back, we'll come back. Then you go down the basement from the time you, last year, when you were doing the oil company problem, and pick up from the photocopies all the stuff that was supposed to be on the cards for oil business. And then just fill up all the cards with the oil company's job, with the instructions for oil companies, and our dumb file clerk is now an oil company file system, okay? Because he's got new instructions. And these things that in the basement, the analogy that I want to make is that those things are dead, not operating, and are just stored. They're not easy to get at. It's hard to get down to the basement. It takes a long time to pull them up and set them in all those cards. But you do that just once in a while when you want to change a problem. When you've got them all in, then you can rapidly take them and put them in, compare them and do this like the filing clerk is supposed to do. So we have cassette tapes or hard disks or floppy disks or various and sundry different ways of taking a large numbers of instructions out and sticking them on the disk and leaving them there, putting them in your back pocket, throwing them around in the boxes while the computer's doing something else. Then if you want to change your computer to a word processor instead of a game or whatever it is, then you just take out one disk, put the other disk in, puts new stuff into the computer, all new instructions, dumb file clerk working like a son of a bitch, and a big memory outside. And that's why computers can do so many things, apparently. The same computer. It doesn't do so many things. It always does the same thing. It follows instructions. And the instructions are very dumb and at a low level. Okay, that's the end of the expose, but I would like to make some remarks and some things about, because people like to think of things more than just how does it work. They would like to know what's the future. Why can't we improve this? Look at what we've got now. We have this enormous memory with lots of data all around, which is sort of sitting there. And this one little section where something's happening, which I called the file clerk before, which is the systems, which go and get something, pull it in here, do something over here, then put it there. Then you take something else and put it here, and put it there, put it there. So this poor file clerk is working perpetually with a tremendous rate of speed, going practically crazy. He does, in fact, I just estimated something like 10 million times faster than an ordinary file clerk. That's 10 times faster 7 times. If you know what I mean, 10 times, 10 times, 10 times 10. That's damn fast. And that's the electrical things are that fast. And but he's working very hard. But the rest of the system, which is the memory, and you've heard they made now memories with 256K bytes. K just means 1,024, so they mean 256 times 1,024, 8-dot symbols. In one tiny chip, okay? It's a lot, and you put several chips in, you've got a terrific computer. Except for the guy, the file clerk, which is called the central processor, who has to look at this program counter and check and change it and look at the next instruction and going, all right? And he's working very hard, so an obvious way to improve the thing is to get another file clerk. Why not have an army of file clerks? Turns out at first that it looked extremely difficult to do that because there's all kinds of technical difficult problems. Suppose that one guy has taken a number out and he's getting ready to change it. He's going to do something and then change the number. The man just sold something, he wants to change it and then put it back. And while he's doing that, the other file clerk is taking the card. He doesn't know whether it's before or after the first file clerk has changed the number, and it's very important to know that because he's going to use that number there. So there has to be a certain amount of organization among the file clerks. And don't forget, they're kind of dumb. So the organization must also be fairly dumb. And it's turned out for many years it was a belief that it was difficult or almost impossible to easily arrange a system with many file clerks. It always turned out to be easier to make one file clerk work very hard than to make several working because of all the, what you might call, bugs and difficulties that come from them all using the same information and changing it on each other and so on and organizing that. The part of laying out the instructions is called the programming. And a programmer works out how to put what instructions to run. The machinery, the wires, the memory, and the boxes where they put the cards, but in our analogy, and the little processor in the middle with all the little switches, is called the hardware. So it always turned out that with a little more clever software, which means clever programs, this single file clerk could do what the others would do because the others were confounded by the problem of interference. But recently it's been shown that it was a misunderstanding, and with clever new ways of analyzing the thing, we have now figured out how to make things run with numbers of file clerks. There's two different general systems. There's one system that has something, a reasonable number like 64 or 128 file clerks all working on the same, similar. They work on almost separate parts of the memory. That's the way it's organized. And only once in a while exchange information. So they're not doing anything to each other's cards. They're each working in separate sections. And there's also a machine called a connection machine, which has 64,000 processors in it, which is a sort of a leap into the wild blue yonder at a time when they were trying to do it with two processors. And if the 64,000 processors could all be made to work at the same time, it'll be 64,000 times faster than it was before, just like that, because they're all working them together. The only problem is to organize the problem and the program so that you can do the job in a way that does use 64,000 guys at the same time. It turns out that it's not as hard as it looked at first, and that's a thing for the future. I'm talking about the future. They're building such a machine, and they're learning how to program it. That is, how to arrange the 64,000 processors, which, by the way, are each, in fact, somewhat stupider than the programmers that I was talking about before, because they can't even read the code for their instructions. By that I mean they know its instructions. Read what's in that file place. That means go over, switch this, switch that, go over, get the file, open the door, close it, and so forth. They can't even read that, so that they have to be instructed on the go. And so there's another machine on the outside that instructs them all what to do. But it has to tell them all, because, see, they all have to do the same thing at the same time. Because the instructions go to everybody. Do this, and they all do it. But if they all do it, you're going to be in a great difficulty if they all do exactly the same thing. And the only opportunity they have, the only thing that you can do that's different is that you can instruct, or they can keep a little memory thing that says, don't pay attention to this instruction. In other words, you can get some to do something and the others to do nothing. The next time you wanted them to do something, if you wanted one to do one thing and one to do another, you have to do it in 2 steps. Do this, you stay put. Do this, you stay put. And so on, okay? And so on. So it's rather interesting, because in trying to manage the 64,000, they all have to be much simpler, and all the time it gets simpler, it gets sort of slower. But the question is whether we gain from the 64,000 what we lose from the slowness, and it depends. We'll learn by experience. That's the future. Finally, I would like to just say some words about what the computers can do. And you'll see they can do only what you would be expected to be able to do with a filing system and a reasonable file clerk. I'll explain an example of an unreasonably good file clerk later that's better than one that we can make with machinery. Okay? So far, we seem to have been able to imitate any file clerk, real file clerk with machinery, but I'll mention a few cases that we don't know how to do that. What we need to do, of course, is to get a definite procedure to convert what you want the clerk to do into an absolutely definite procedure. Every step is precisely defined in this stupid way, exactly. And if you can do that, then you can get the system to work. Now, will the system think? If you could define exactly a definite procedure, tell somebody exactly how to think, which, by the way, is what the members of my workshop have expected me to do for them. To tell them exactly, step by step, what to do to think. If I could do that, I could do it for a computer, and I wouldn't have, I could get the computer to think. But nobody knows what we do or how to define a series of steps which correspond to something abstract like thinking. But nevertheless, we could make machines which play chess, which was supposed to be something that takes thinking. And what exactly do they do? What definite procedure could you make with a big file system, very fast operating gadget, by which the thing could be used to play chess? Never mind the input and output, the information of where the pieces on the chessboard are converted into numbers or dots and so forth, ones and zeros they're called, inside the machine, and then it proceeds. So never mind the translation. The idea is, in a given position, which is a whole lot of information, is where it is, you want to know which way to move. So you say, well, there are many ways I could move. You look at the rules for how to move. The knight goes this way, the queen goes this way, so on. And you just list all the different ways it could move. And you see all the new possible positions. Then you say, in each one of those, which way could the other guy move? It's getting pretty big, isn't it? But they're big machines, and they got lots of storage space. So what's the next move? And if he does that, what can I do? And you just check every one of the positions after, let's say, 4 or 5 or 6 half moves. These are called half moves. One side moves, and the other side moves. And see which of the final positions you're better off. And better off might be some little rule like you haven't been in check. I mean, you haven't had your king lost. That means you're not dead. And you've got more pieces than the other guy. Okay? So you look down 6 steps down to see which move is the best to make, where you got the best possible outcome. And you make that move. Then your opponent makes a move. Then you start again, this time going down 6 again. Of course, you're going deeper now because the game has proceeded a little bit further. And that's all there is to it. What the machines do is just a tremendous amount of trying different positions. A human being doesn't. A human being tries about 35 positions as far as we can tell. When he's in a position, he tries about 35 looks at different moves before he makes a decision. Whereas the machine makes something like 35 million positions to check. That doesn't make the machine better than the other guy. We don't understand how we do it. We cannot give a direct procedure for this. The man does it by recognizing a pattern. Oh, this knight can fork the king and queen or something. So if it goes here, so I have to watch out about that square. He sees patterns. At least he describes it that way. We really don't know how it works. And this business of the describing patterns and so forth is something that we haven't been able to put into a precise form. When he says it looks, oh, I just see that it's a good idea to try this, and I tried it. We don't know how he does that. So we can't make it play like a human plays, but we can make it play better than almost all humans. Machines, computer machines have been used, for instance, for designing machinery or designing something, in particular designing a computing machine, for instance, or something like that. In a computing machine, you have to have the different elements, the memory and so on, in different locations with wires in such a way that the wire lengths are shortest so that the time is quickest, and the parts that are being used most are closest to where you want to use them, and things like that. And so you try to figure where should you lay them out on this chip of silicon. And it has been quite a problem of design. We have engineers that work very hard at designing these things and working these things out. And all we do in the computer now is to try large numbers of possible arrangements. We just give it an instruction, put this here, then this, and how much wire do you need? Now put here, how much wire, and then pick the one out which has the biggest, more ones, the biggest, or the lowest, the best quality, whatever it is you do to measure how good this particular design is, like the amount of time and the amount of that it takes to do a calculation, or how much silicon you use, or something like that. So we can select from a very large numbers of alternatives, the best alternative. Ordinarily, a person doing that doesn't waste his time with obviously useless alternatives. But we do not know how to put too well that idea of the obviously useless. If we try to make too sharp the rule that it's useless, we miss sometimes a good opportunity that would have been a good thing. So that's as far as we can go with that. You've probably heard that machines have been used to be almost like doctors, expert systems which can diagnose disease. Now, how can a damn file clerk? Well, it's easy, isn't it? How would you diagnose disease? You write down all the symptoms, and then you'd like to have a book that you could look up that says, here's all the symptoms, and this is what you have. And in the complicated cases, you list all the symptoms, and in there it says it's either cholera morbus of the borbus, or it's bacteremia, or whatever it is, you see. However, you can tell the difference by looking with ultraviolet light up the nostril, all right? But ordinarily, you don't bother to look with ultraviolet light off at the nostril, so you don't know the answer to that. So the thing comes back and says, look with ultraviolet in the nostril and tell me whether it gets through or not. Say yes, okay, it's bacteremia. So this filing system contains all this stuff, plus the incomplete decisions that require more information. And it's been arranged so that when it comes to a place that's incomplete, it simply sends back and says, make the following test and tell me the result. The thing doesn't work as well as a real doctor. But anyway, you get some idea of how machines can be doctors, how machines can be chess players, and how machines can be designers of equipment or layouts for businesses or whatever, or routing for trucks, and so on. But just trying all kinds of routings and seeing which is the best. That's all there is to it. It's a filing system, and anything that you can put in a filing system and think of how a big filing system could do it, especially things that you just have to remember a lot of stuff or try out a lot of possibilities, those things can be done with a machine.
Now some of you might be thinking, Mike, I did not need to listen to 45 minutes of such a detailed presentation. You know what? You're probably right, because you're probably doing something else with your life. If you didn't think that man and that presentation was not worth 45 minutes of your life, what in the hell is wrong with you? Of course that presentation from Feynman is valuable. Of course it's timeless. And considering all the time we waste, but to understand how he explains this glorified filing cabinet is just spot on. And if you understand how the filing cabinet works, and now roll forward several decades, and you're simply looking to use a computer to assist you on your trading, it makes the whole process far less scary, far less daunting. I maintain that that foundation is paramount for any type of trading, entrepreneurial business success. It's all about concrete steps that you can measure and you do exactly. This gets back to the systematic aspect of trend following. The value of being a systematic trend following trader is to not let the intuition come in, to not let the feelings come in, to execute on rule. That's the trick. Now you might be saying to yourself, Michael, and this is a slight tangent on my end, Michael, this man, Richard Feynman, is brilliant. He was brilliant. One of the smartest minds of the 20th century. Well, that might be the case. But there's absolutely no reason for us not to learn from him, not to be inspired from him. And you sure as hell should not be putting him up on a pedestal to think that you can't have some type of intellectual rigor that he does. How did Feynman get there? How did he get to this genius place? As I said, this is a slight tangent. Here's a great clip that goes into exactly the style of learning that it took to become a Richard Feynman, called The Common Character Traits of Geniuses.
I'm tempted to say smart, creative people have no particularly different set of character traits than the rest of us, except for being smart and creative, and those being character traits. And then on the other hand, I wrote a biography of Richard Feynman and a biography of Isaac Newton. Now there are two great scientific geniuses whose characters were, in some superficial ways, completely different. Isaac Newton was solitary, antisocial, I think unpleasant, bitter, fought with his friends as much as with his enemies. Richard Feynman was gregarious, funny, a great dancer, loved women. Isaac Newton, I believe, never had sex. Richard Feynman, I believe, had plenty. So you can't generalize there. On the other hand, they were both, as I tried to get in their heads, understand their minds, the nature of their genius, I sort of felt I was seeing things that they had in common. And they were things that had to do with aloneness. Newton was much more obviously alone than Feynman, but Feynman didn't particularly work well with others. He was known as a great teacher, but he wasn't a great teacher, I don't think, one-on-one. I think he was a great lecturer. I think he was a great communicator. But when it came time to make the great discoveries of science, he was alone in his head. And now I'm talking, when I say he, I mean both Feynman and Newton. And this applies also, I think, to the geniuses that I write about in The Information. Charles Babbage, Alan Turing, Ada Byron. They all had the ability to concentrate with a sort of intensity that is hard for mortals like me to grasp. A kind of passion for abstraction that doesn't lend itself to easy communication, I don't think.
And once you start to look at learning that way, once you start to look at learning as something about focus, dedicated personal focus, you can't achieve and learn sitting in a room with a bunch of other people that are not as focused as you, or perhaps want to learn something else. The best way to learn is when you decide you want it, and then you're going to concentrate deeply. Now, maybe that messes you up in some other walk of life. Maybe that doesn't make you the life of the party. But if you want freedom, if you want to get some extra cash, if you want to make a fortune, it sure as hell is not done being the life of the party. It's sure as hell not done being out every night. It's done with 100% dedication. I love that last clip. It completely ties together every place that I wanted to drop into today, the places I wanted to visit today, from Penn Jillette to Gerd Gigerenzer to Daniel Dennett to Richard Feynman, just brilliant minds. And every last one of those thinkers, in my opinion, relate right back to my core subject of trend following. Every last aspect of those types of thinking, every last aspect of the thought process that I presented, that I curated, that I brought to you, the audience today, instrumental, foundational, must have. Going out today, let me bring it back to John Lee Hooker. A great live presentation.
Boom, 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 boom. I'm gonna shoot you right down, right off of your feet. Take you home with me, put you in my house. Boom, 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 boom. I love to see you strut up and down the floor when you're talking to me. That baby talk, I like it like that. How, 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 how. Whoa, baby. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
The fourth monologue, the statistical mindset. A white paper rolls into me unexpectedly, where somebody sent me the article, and I kept digging through the article to eventually find the white paper. Titled, 3 Decades Later, The Life Experiences and Midlife Functioning of 1980s Heavy Metal Groupies, Musicians, and Fans. Ladies and gentlemen, that means me. For somebody who has been to, back in the day, Iron Maiden, Van Halen, Ronnie James Dio concerts, that clearly fits me. Especially since I was in high school in the early 1980s, mid-1980s. The psychologists out there that apparently had too much time on their hands somehow or another decided to look at what became of those people that had those heavy metal tendencies back in the day, it turns out we're all happy today. I mean, that's the long and short of it. But there's a certain happiness apparently amongst those of us that listened to some metal back in the early 80s. And to quote from the white paper, youth form their sense of self through active reflection, trying on new hats, and assimilating the values of groups to which they belong, even if those groups are dark or not mainstream. I thought that summed up great, perhaps my attraction for metal music in the early 80s. Not rebellion just for the pure sake to be rebellious, but no. Me personally, I knew that many messages, many things that I was learning at that point in time, without having a full understanding of the playing field, were 100% agenda-driven, people pushing me to a certain direction and not giving me the full story. Perhaps what this white paper lays out quite clearly is that metal was the place for rebels to feel connected. And when you don't know what the playing field is, and you're a young person, the music's kind of cool, you're in. It interests you. It interested me. I can still remember Tipper Gore, the wife of Al Gore, who almost became the president of America. Tipper Gore was trying to ban heavy metal music back in the day in the early 1980s because it was devil music, and that anybody that listened to this type of music was possibly going to go to, quote, hell. It was entirely insane in America at that point in time. So, of course, anybody like me that would see this messaging, not only was the wider messaging clearly agenda-driven, but now they were taking on the music itself and saying that somehow or another, if I listened to Judas Priest or Iron Maiden or Black Sabbath or Van Halen, that somehow or another I was now this evil incarnate. So to roll forward to this white paper today in 2015, and apparently there's some good psychological research that identifying with the metal music and those that identified actually have found very nice happiness. I just thought that was a cool open, a cool way to bring into where I want to go today. Those of you that listen to my podcast should know by now that I don't like it when facts are rejected. I'm not a big fan of those of you out there that just want to buy into charisma for the sake of charisma. You'd rather have the romance of lies than know the truth. I'm not saying you as in all of you, but many people out there, they want the deception. They want to be deceived. In the last few weeks, I've learned that a trading author, a name that I won't mention, but one that is easily learned, has been arrested 4 times in the last year. Now, this doesn't surprise me. I've followed this character for a long time as part of my writings and part of my research. Quite frankly, it's one of those things that I love to expose. Something that's not accurate, something that's not true. And showing people, hey, look, here are the facts. Now I know my work has shown a great many people the facts, and they perhaps changed their perspective. But maybe, and I don't know the exact numbers, maybe just as many of those people would see the facts and say, I don't care. Michael, I don't care that the person you're talking about is possibly a con artist. I don't care that this person has been arrested 4+ times in the last 2 years, and who knows how many other times. That's immaterial to me. In fact, I think Bernie Madoff got a bad deal, Michael. Michael, I want to forgive everybody. Michael, I'm into kumbaya. Michael, I just want to hold hands. Michael, why are you so zealous in your pursuit of the truth? So why can't you just let these people that are con artists be con artists? Why can't you just let them drive the lambs to the slaughter? Well, of course I can. Look, I'm like you too. I like to watch people that just give their brain over and don't ask questions, don't critically think. There are, however, a few people out there that just don't know. They just don't have all the information. But I just enjoy and have enjoyed since putting my first website up in 1996. I've enjoyed the act of putting the spotlight on a fact or on the truth. That's exciting to me. It's still exciting to me. Exciting might sound like an odd word, but to me, it's exciting because if so many people have an incorrect view, a wrong view, it's always fun to walk into the room and show better. Not because I've got this massive ego that I'm trying to be right, this or that. No, it's just sheer raising human ingenuity up, raising human progress up, and moving the bar further along. It's natural selection. It's evolution. That's what this is all about. My main example I want to talk about today is an article that I spotted in Forbes, written by Kai Trang Ho, titled, "What Jurassic World Can Teach Investors About the Stock Market." She says, like the sci-fi amusement park in Jurassic World, Wall Street has to engineer new assets every year to attract investors. Financial firms create mathematically modified funds with proprietary formulas or quantitative algorithms that manage to beat the stock market in back tests. But the industry graveyard attests to the reality that simplicity trumps complexity. Financially engineered assets often fail to perform as their creators intended, or they're ill-equipped to deal with unanticipated events. Ultimately, hedge funds, mutual funds, and exchange-traded funds have to destroy their own creations to save themselves from ruin. That's her opening paragraph. I can only think of one group of hedge funds that talk about being quantitative, that talk about being systematic and algorithms, that have been doing it for decades. There's only one group. It's trend following traders. And whether that's called in public CTAs or managed futures, systematic quant trading, whatever you want to call it, trend following traders are it. So as I start to read her opening paragraph, I'm like, ooh, this is going to be interesting. She's going to dive into trend following. Actually, it turns out to be an interview. It's an interview with a gentleman named Ben Carlson. He's got a new book out. Right off the bat, the title of the new book jumps out at me. It's like, wow, okay, I already think I'm on the same page, the same alignment with Ben. A Wealth of Common Sense, Why Simplicity Trumps Complexity in Any Investment Plan. Who in the world can disagree with that title? Fantastic title. Now, I've not had a chance to speak with Ben. Perhaps he'll be a good guest on my show. I've not asked him. This is more about me looking at an article and looking for the truth and looking for the deviations from the truth in the article. She starts the interview by asking, what do you mean by complex strategies and what do you mean by simple? And why is simple better than complex? I'm already in love with her. She's asking the right question. I don't know what the answer is going to be. I'm going to read the answer in a second. That's exactly the way to think. Simple is better. Now, if I go back to her beginning opening paragraph, taking pot shots at quantified strategies, systematic strategies, etc., most of those, the best ones, the ones with longevity, are rather simple. Back to her question, what do you mean by complex strategies and what do you mean by simple and why is simple better than complex? Ben Carlson responds, complex strategies are anything that allows investors to try to get too clever with their portfolios. This includes overtrading, paying high costs for sophisticated strategies, trying to outsmart the market over the short term, changing your investment process or philosophy constantly, making excessive ad hoc decisions, and looking for the holy grail of investing strategies. I sure as hell don't know any strategy where all of those things apply to. I absolutely agree 100% with Ben. Overtrading, bad idea. Trying to outsmart the market. First off, we need to define what the market is. We probably need to define what outsmart means. Trying to outsmart the market over the short term? Absolutely. If I'm just taking that as general language, how can I not agree? 100% accurate. Looking for the Holy Grail? There is no Holy Grail. Like I said, I don't know Ben, but I'm already feeling like, well, okay, I like this perspective. I like where he's going on this, because generally, without knowing specifically what he's talking about, we're on the same page. The questions to Ben continues. How do you recommend investors build their portfolios? Ben Carlson responds, you always have to start by considering your own personal risk profile and time horizon. This includes both your need and ability to take risk, as well as how much risk you prefer to take. This should guide all future asset allocation and investment decisions with regard to how much risk, liquidity, and growth is necessary from your portfolio. He brings up some great points. But if you don't reduce risk to a number, like I have $100, I'm willing to lose $10, I'm willing to risk $10, you've got to be that definite. Because if you leave this idea of risk to the public, up to their imagination, how are people going to know what to do? Risk has to be defined. Absolutely defined. And then once you define it, there's no way that risk and reward are not related. So if you define your risk as X and you want your reward to be this, well, if you redefine your risk as Y, then your reward is going to be this. They're connected. They're each side of the same coin. They can't be disconnected. Let me continue with the next question from Kai Trang Ho to Ben Carlson. What is the proper way, proper in italics, what is the proper way for investors to view the stock market and their portfolios? Ben Carlson responds, think of shares purchased in the stock market as minor ownership in both the future earnings and dividends of the corporate world. The long-term trend has always been higher, but from time to time, human nature will affect how much people are willing to pay for those earnings and dividends. Stocks should be thought of as long-term investments. Think years or decades, not months or quarters, to benefit from their appreciation. Typically, stocks are used to compound money over time, while bonds are used to preserve it. Now I'm starting to feel like I've got a difference of opinion. First off, the long-term trend has always been higher. None of us live forever. Look at the Japanese stock market. Look at the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ's just got back to highs after 15 years. Because what Ben is talking about really in that paragraph is buy and hold. That's the only option that's presented, is buy and hold. You're left to the mercy of the market. If you're a Japanese stockholder today, you're still 50% down from the 1989 high. That's a long wait to be 50% down. What's the guarantee that if you take a buy and hold position in U.S. stocks today, that 25 years from now, it's going to be higher? There is no guarantee. If there is no guarantee, why not choose a strategy, an alternate strategy? And look, I'm not going to give you an alternate strategy that has a guarantee either, but I'm going to give you something a little more real. I'm going to give you an alternate thinking that's a little more real, that takes into account that not every investor is completely comfortable being saddled with the exact average of their neighbor in the exact cul-de-sac with the exact house and the exact car and the exact 2.5 kids and 2.5 dogs. Some people out there want above average. They want to shoot for something more in life. Because like I said, look, the Japanese stock market investing public, if they just trust the average, they've been shit out of luck for 25 years. So why be average? There isn't a piece of literature in this planet that says, for the limited time that we have on this planet, you should shoot for average. What is the point of shooting for average? Yes, if you take higher risk, you can get possibly higher reward. You also can lose more money. But higher risk and higher reward compounded will beat the average over the long term, absolutely. Look at the number one stock investor that we all want to look towards in America. Warren Buffett knows one damn thing deep in his gut. He knows that he wants double-digit percent returns, over 20% if he can get it, and he wants to compound it. And to get that, Warren Buffett knows that he's going to take 50% drawdowns. He knows he will lose 50% of his capital at some point in time because he's trying to get rich. Why do we all pay attention to Warren Buffett? We pay attention to Warren Buffett because we're all trying to get rich. And then we turn around and we pretend, oh, you know what? Let's just buy the average and sit back in our matrix-like cocoon, sucking on the teat of whatever the government gives us, and we'll just be happy. So if I go back to that question, and excuse the momentary diversion that I just took there, but if I go back to that question, she asks Ben, what is the proper way? She asks it in quotes. Well, there is no proper way. There is absolutely no proper way on how to invest or how to trade. It's going to come down to you doing your homework, determining what risks and rewards you want to shoot for. Then that's it. You make the decisions, you go. Don't think like your neighbors. You're not your neighbors, you're you. Another question. What is the best way to make use of a financial advisor or consultant? Ben Carlson responds, the very best advisors should act as something of a behavioral psychologist, an educator, and a financial expert. They should help you set reasonable expectations, create a sound investment policy statement, and ensure that you're able to follow through with a long-term plan. They should also be very good communicators, but even better listeners. An advisor cannot make promises about the future with any certainty, but they should do their best to give you the highest probability of meeting your goals and desires. And their biggest job may be keeping investors from getting in their own way and avoiding huge mistakes at the wrong time. There's absolutely nothing that I can disagree with Ben in that statement. That is just pragmatic, sound advice. Well, actually, there's one thing I can disagree with. There is no person that you can hire that will do those things for you. I repeat, there is no person that you can hire that will do those things for you. It does not exist. You have to do those things for yourself. It's your responsibility to be your own behavioral psychologist. You can't pay an advisor to do that. And if you think you can pay an advisor to do that, you're drinking Kool-Aid. Now you might be thinking to yourself, but Michael, you have many professional trend following traders on your podcast. They would all like to raise assets. They would like to raise my assets. My interest is in the subject of trend following trading. I think it's a fantastic subject because it encompasses so many different variables, from thinking about the economics behind it, the behavioral psychology behind it, the technique behind it. My interest is not in hedge fund management. That's not my interest. Now, of course, I've met some fantastic fund managers, brilliant people, honorable people. But their business of expanding their business, that's their business. That's what they're trying to do. You have to make the decision that if you determine a particular type of strategy, you have to decide, will I execute that strategy by myself or will I hire someone? And it's very different to hire an advisor, a financial advisor that you don't actually put your money with, somebody that just gives you consultation, versus making an allocation to a trader who will trade your money for you in a systematic fashion, following rules in a religious way. Those are two different beasts. And they're personal choices. They're absolutely personal choices. Nobody can make them for you. But I just don't see what the financial advisor direction does for most people. Because ultimately, you have to know what you want. And if you're just trusting someone else to make those decisions for you, and again, I'm drawing a distinction. I think giving your money to a professional trading advisor is quite different than listening to a financial advisor give you assorted options. The questions continue. What are the necessary traits to be a successful investor? Ben Carlson responds, an investor needs to have enough emotional intelligence to understand themselves and their own personality when constructing an investment plan. They also need patience, the correct temperament, the ability to admit their own limitations, an understanding of financial history, and the discipline to stick with a strategy over the long term. Hey, that is spot on. Look, and I'm not attempting to pick on Ben. I've not met Ben, and perhaps, like I said, I need to get him on my podcast. He seems like he's got some really grounded thoughts here, and I cannot disagree with a word in that statement. Just to add the caveat, though, that it has to come down to you. You have to know what your plan is. You have to know what your risk is going to be. You have to know what kind of goal you're shooting for. And you can't trust other people to think for you. You've got to do it. One last question from the article, and this one perhaps is the most controversial and brings me back to the very beginning of this piece that was hinting about algorithms and quantitative strategies without naming trend following and without really going into any detail. Look, you can go back and find writings in the 1800s about being systematic. Systematic is a smart way to trade. And if you can automate your systematic strategy using technology, all the better. The last question. You claim one of the stock market myths is that commodities are a good long-term investment. Why is that a myth, and what is the truth about investing in commodities? Ben Carlson responds, over the long term, commodities have stock-like volatility with returns not much higher than T-bills. This means they are better suited for trading than investing because they go through extreme boom-bust cycles. Commodities can help in a highly inflationary environment such as the 1970s, but the majority of the time, investors will be disappointed in their returns. Plus, there are so many more speculators in commodity markets now than in the past that any risk premium earned in past decades has probably been compressed. If you think about it, a long-term bet on commodities is a bet against technology innovation. While we need and use resources, I like to think that innovation wins out in the end. And that was the final answer from Ben Carlson to the commodities question. So this commodities question, if you're an investor out there and you're taking long-only positions in, quote, commodity ETFs, are you brain dead? Seriously, why would you be a buy and hold investor in commodities? All you have to do is like the minimum amount of historical research to look at the volatile nature of commodity markets. And I'm talking about currencies, bonds, agriculturals, corn, coffee, orange juice, palladium, gold. These are all commodities. They go up and they go down. And they are the lifeblood of great trend following strategy. Because see, there's quite a difference that if you just want to talk about the market and say commodities, then if you say commodities traded as a trend following trader, these are two different worlds. Just a long-only investor in commodities is like saying, I'm really stupid. I have no clue what I'm doing, but Wall Street has created this great new thing called long-only commodities, and I'm buying because I'm brain dead. Or, wow, this is an interesting strategy over here. The trend-following strategy is very effective trading commodities markets. Look at the returns over the last 50 years. Two different worlds. And look, again, this is not a beat Ben up podcast. I don't know Ben, and he's 100% right in this last passage because I assume he's talking about the idea of commodities only investing, commodities only, long only investing. In that last part of the answer, he also brings up the notion of speculation and more speculators in commodities. Look, commodities is about hedging and speculation. Different people go to commodities markets for different reasons. Trend following is speculation, and trend following is trying to capture that hedger premium. That's what you're trying to capture. But I just want to be accurate when we think about speculation in commodities markets. I would impress upon you, if you really want to know more about commodity futures trading, go to the CME website. Read some about the historical nature. Read how commodity futures markets operate. Read about who benefits from them. These are not just trading vehicles simply for speculation. Many large corporations are using commodity markets for hedging purposes. Farmers, large ag companies, there's a reason for commodity futures speculation. And there's a reason for commodity futures hedging. Both are needed to make a market. One last point. At the end there, Ben Carlson makes the note that a long-term bet on commodities is a bet against technology innovation. If he is speaking about just going long-only commodities, which is an absolutely asinine strategy, he's 100% right. But if you are a speculator, a trend-following speculator, who cares about whether technology wins out or not? Who is trying to predict what happens tomorrow? Why should any of us care? The only thing we should care about, if this market is going up, we're long. If this market is going down, we're short. We're not trying to have any kind of emotional attachment to any aspect of our investing. We're simply saying we're going to follow along. We're the silent partners, so to speak. Whichever way the market moves, that's the way we're going. My objective of taking a random article out of Forbes, profiling an interview, is simply to widen the scope of vision of the people listening to my podcast. I want you to see what is in front of you. I don't want you to only read the words on the page. I want you to look wider. I want you to see what is in front of you from a much wider perspective than the article gives you. Because almost every article, and I'm sure somebody can say this about me, almost every article is driving an agenda. I'm driving an agenda. My agenda is to promote and to talk about and to educate the style of trend following trading. That is so much fun to me. It just so happens that passion of mine allows me to walk into almost every corner of Wall Street and tear apart what the promotion is, what the writing is, and to offer a different perspective. Maybe you don't like my perspective. Maybe you say my perspective is 100% bullshit, and that's completely your right. But you know what? I've got more evidence than you. I've got a lot more evidence than you. You do not have more evidence. I'm not being cocky when I say that. I'm just saying if we literally want to stack the evidence up on a table and go through the pages, the trend following space is going to win in terms of an argument. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a trend following trader or you want to be a trend following trader. But for those of you out there that want to compound larger returns and try to get rich, there's no other opportunity. There is no other opportunity you can pursue other than trend following that gives you such a great chance to get there. Now, of course, if one wants to just take the path of least resistance, if one just wants to shoot for the average and be like their neighbors, and this is not a knock against anybody I've commented on today or anything I've commented on today, there are other choices. You can go the buy and hold path. But if you go that path, just keep in mind, we have seen this in the last 15 years. Things can change, and they can change really, really quick. And when they do, are you going to have a strategy that benefits from that change? And if you don't, are you prepared to sit on the sidelines with no gains for 30 years, maybe longer? Absolutely is an option. Going out today, I want to play an excerpt from somebody that I've played on my podcast most recently, Alan Watts. Alan Watts is my favorite trend following trader who does not know that he's a trend following trader. Of course, he's not alive today, but that's immaterial. His wisdom is spot on. The guy is 100% brilliant. He knew human nature like not many others. This excerpt I'm going to play is about choice. And it dovetails nicely with where I've gone in this podcast, because ultimately you do need to choose. You can assemble all the data. Or actually, you can't assemble all the data because data is infinite. It never stops. So what is enough? What's enough to make the choice? Are you not going to make the choice because you're afraid of making a mistake? But you're going to make mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes. Making mistakes is part of the process. So if you're trying not to make a mistake, you're making a choice as well. But you're not going to stop yourself from making a mistake. You're still going to make them. So this comes down to, can you find a way to get some self-confidence? Because if you can get that self-confidence, then, and only then, can you trust your intuition.
You do not know where your decisions come from. They pop up like hiccups. And when you make a decision, people have a great deal of anxiety about making decisions. Did I think this over long enough? Did I take enough data into consideration? And if you think it through, you find you never could take enough data into consideration. The data for a decision in any given situation is infinite. So what you do is, you go through the motions of thinking out what you will do about this. But warriors are people who think of all the variables beyond their control and what might happen.
Choice is the act of hesitation that we make before making a decision. It is a mental wobbling. And so we are always in a dither of doubt as to whether we're behaving the right way, doing the right thing, and so on and so forth, and lack a certain kind of self-confidence. And if you see you lack self-confidence, you will make mistakes through sheer fumbling. If you do have self-confidence, you may get away with doing entirely the wrong thing. You have to regard yourself as a cloud in the flesh, because you see, clouds never make mistakes. Did you ever see a cloud that was misshapen? Did you ever see a badly designed wave? No, they always do the right thing. But if you will treat yourself for a while as a cloud or wave and realize that you can't make a mistake, whatever you do, because even if you do something that seems to be totally disastrous, it'll all come out in the wash somehow or other. Then, through this capacity, you will develop a kind of confidence. And through confidence, you will be able to trust your own intuition. Now, this is the middle way of knowing it has nothing to do with your decision to do this or not. Whether you decide that you can't make a mistake or whether you don't decide it, it's true anyway. But you are like cloud and water. And through that realization, without overcompensating in the other direction, you will come to the point where you begin to be on good terms with your own being and to be able to trust your own brain.
My fifth monologue in this epic episode, instruments versus strategy. You trade markets. You invest in markets. A market could be a stock. It could be an index. It could be a commodity. It could be gold. It could be silver. It could be palladium. It could be oil. It could be a currency. It could be the Swiss franc. It could be a bond. They're all markets. people buying and selling. There might be different fundamentals behind all of those markets. I'm sure there are quite different fundamentals behind all of those markets. But people are the same. People buy and sell with the same motivations, the same rationales. And at the end of the day, there's great evidence that ignoring the fundamentals and going straight to the price action, straight to what that market is being traded at right now, is the best way to go about long-term success. Let me clarify about markets. Someone asked me the other day, they said, where do I learn to start trading stocks? And I said, well, stocks are just a market or an instrument depending on what you mean. But just saying I want to trade stocks or you trade stocks, that's not a strategy. And just to take the concept of markets a little bit further along, there's many ways you can trade those markets that I just mentioned. Many, what I would call instruments. Most people call them instruments. You can trade stocks with just standard stocks, standard equities. You can trade stocks with futures. You can trade stocks with ETFs. You can trade stocks with leaps options. There are multiple types of instruments you can trade markets with. Where am I going with all this? It's this insanity where people get caught up in instruments and markets. And the reality is what you should be concerned about is the strategy. What strategy are you employing? Don't get hung up on the instrument. Don't get hung up on the market. Oh, I don't know anything about currencies. I can't trade currencies. Guess what? You don't know anything about stocks either. Oh, I know everything about Facebook. No, you don't. You absolutely, I know everything about Apple. Oh, really? How many people truly went long Apple 15 years ago and are sitting there today? Come on. You don't. No one knows what's going to happen tomorrow. No one has perfect fundamentals. There's no such thing as perfect fundamentals. There's no such thing as enough fundamentals. There's always more fundamentals. So the reality is we all face the situation. Are we going to trade markets? Yes. And what type of instrument are we going to use? Stocks, ETFs, futures, leaps, perhaps something else. That is the choice. Those are the choices. That's the way you want to think about this game. Don't allow yourself to say, I can't trade currencies. I can't trade commodities. Commodities, ooh, that sounds scary. Commodities, that's risky. Guess what? The S&P can drop 50%, and it has twice in the last 15 years. The Shanghai can drop 30% in just a few months, and it has. So don't talk to me about risk on just some selected market or instrument. That's nonsensical. You trade these markets, you trade these instruments with a strategy, and you define your risk. Just saying a market is risky, come on, that's silly. That's not the way to think. My whole setup today of defining markets, defining instruments, and talking about strategy is to introduce a company called Commodities Corporation that was acquired by Goldman Sachs in 1997 for estimated to be around $100 million. At the time, they had about $2 billion in assets under management. So Commodities Corporation ceased to exist as a company that we could all kind of follow. They put out annual reports. Very famous traders worked there. Goldman Sachs absorbed them. Still to this day, people read about Commodities Corporation literally every day in two of the most famous books about Wall Street. Jack Schwager's The Market Wizards and The New Market Wizards feature prominently, because Jack was associated with Commodities Corporation, feature prominently traders that were associated with working with Commodities Corporation. Paul Tudor Jones, Louis Bacon, Bruce Kovner, Michael Marcus, Ed Seykota. Those books very well could have mentioned Commodities Corporation prominently on the front cover, given the largesse of some of the superstars that were inside. Those books would have had a hard time coming into existence without the cooperation of so many legendary traders associated with Commodities Corporation. Let me read a few bio points about Commodities Corporation. The company was founded by Helmut Weimar and Amos Hofstadter with $2.5 million of capital in 1969. Weimer was a childhood friend of Hofstadter's son Amos Jr. and had studied commodities at MIT. As a result of his PhD thesis work on cocoa, Weimer took a job working for Nabisco in 1965. Hofstadter, who had been Weimer's mentor, had begun trading stocks and commodities in the 1930s working for Hayden Stone. Hofstadter, whose simple principles for trading are still widely circulated, joined the firm at the age of 67, trading part-time and working to create trading systems to be used by the entire firm. Among Commodities Corporation's other co-founders were Nobel laureate economist Paul Samuelson, who was also Weimer's thesis advisor, Paul Kuttner, an MIT professor, and Frank Vanderson, a colleague of Weimer's from Nabisco. Commodities Corporation would bring a large number of PhDs onto its payroll throughout the 1970s. They were originally founded to take advantage of trading opportunities in tradable physical commodities, but would later branch out into trading other futures such as currencies. I want to add to that from Wikipedia with an excerpt from Fortune, 1981. Quote, "Despite the academic trappings, the company is a model of bustling entrepreneurship. Commodities Corporation barely owns anything that can't be turned into cash in a matter of hours. It's like a big pile of money," end quote. Now that speaks to trading liquid instruments. 1981 outlining quite clearly a benefit that you still want today. Can you get out of it? Can you get out of that market? Look what's happening in China right now. Very difficult to get out. Absolutely very difficult to get out if you want to get out. Many types of restrictions. And that's not to say we could not see the same thing in America. We absolutely could see the same thing. But your best strategy is to start with liquidity. Can you enter and exit the markets you're going to trade with relative ease? That really has to be the start of your process. Just for a few minutes, I want to take a sidetrack, though. I want to take a sidetrack from Commodities Corporation to insert an audio clip from the physicist Richard Feynman. His very straightforward and clear to understand definition, explanation of the scientific method is critical.
Now I'm going to discuss how we would look for a new law. In general, we look for a new law by the following process. First, we guess it. Then we well, don't laugh, that's really true. Then we compute the consequences of the guess to see what, if this is right, if this law that we guessed is right, we see what it would imply. And then we compare those computation results to nature. Or we say compare to experiment or experience. Compare it directly with observation to see if it works. If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. In that simple statement is the key to science. It doesn't make a difference how beautiful your guess is. It doesn't make a difference how smart you are who made the guess or what his name is. If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. That's all there is to it. It's therefore not unscientific to take a guess, although many people who are not in science think it is. For instance, I had a conversation about flying saucers some years ago with laymen. Because I'm scientific, I know all about flying saucers. So I said, I don't think there are flying saucers. So my antagonist said, is it impossible that there are flying saucers? Can you prove that it's impossible? I said, no, I can't prove it's impossible. It's just very unlikely. That, they say, you are very unscientific. If you can't prove it impossible, then how can you say it's likely, that it's unlikely? Well, that's the way, that is scientific. It is scientific only to say what's more likely and less likely, and not to be proving all the time possible and impossible. To define what I mean, I finally said to him, listen, I mean that from my knowledge of the world that I see around me, I think that it is much more likely that the reports of flying saucers are the results of the known irrational characteristics of terrestrial intelligence rather than the unknown rational efforts of extraterrestrial intelligence. It's just more likely, that's all. And it's a good guess. And we always try to guess the most likely explanation, keeping in the back of the mind the fact that if it doesn't work, then we must discuss the other possibilities. There was, for instance, for a while, a phenomenon called superconductivity. There still is the phenomenon, which is that metals conduct electricity without resistance at low temperatures, and it was not at first obvious that this was a consequence of the known laws with these particles, but it turns out that it has been thought through carefully enough, and it's seen, in fact, to be a consequence of known laws. There are other phenomena, such as extrasensory perception, which cannot be explained by this known knowledge of physics here, and it is interesting, however, that that phenomenon has not been well established, and that we cannot guarantee that it's there. So if it could be demonstrated, of course that would prove that the physics is incomplete, and therefore it's extremely interesting to physicists, whether it's right or wrong, and many, many experiments exist which show it doesn't work. The same goes for astrological influences. If it were true that the stars could affect the day that it was good to go to the dentist, then, as in America we have that kind of astrology, then it would be wrong. The physics theory would be wrong, because there's no mechanism understandable in principle from these things that would make it go. And that's the reason that there's some skepticism among scientists with regard to those ideas. Now you see, of course, that with this method we can disprove any definite theory. If you have a definite theory, a real guess from which you can really compute consequences which could be compared to experiment, then in principle we can get rid of any theory. We can always prove any definite theory wrong. Notice, however, we never prove it right. Suppose that you invent a good guess, calculate the consequences, and discover that every consequence that you calculate agrees with experiment. The theory is then right? No, it is simply not proved wrong. Because in the future, there could be a wider range of experiments, you can compute a wider range of consequences, and you may discover then that the thing is wrong. That's why laws like Newton's laws for the motion of planets last such a long time. He guessed the law of gravitation, calculated all the kinds of consequences for the solar system and so on, compared them to experiment, and it took several hundred years before the slight error of the motion of Mercury was developed. During all that time, the theory had been failed to be proved wrong and could be taken to be temporarily right, but it can never be proved right, because tomorrow's experiment may succeed in proving what you thought was right wrong. So we never are right, we can only be sure we're wrong. However, it's rather remarkable that we can last so long. I mean, have some idea which will last so long. I must also point out to you that you cannot prove a vague theory wrong. If the guess that you make is poorly expressed and rather vague, and the method that you use for figuring out the consequences is rather a little vague, you're not sure, I mean, you say, I think everything's because it's all due to Mughals, and Mughals do this and that, more or less, so I can sort of explain how this works, then you see that that theory is good because it can't be proved wrong. If the process of computing the consequences is indefinite, then with a little skill, any experimental result can be made to look like an expected consequence. You're probably familiar with that in other fields. For example, A hates his mother. The reason is, of course, because she didn't caress him or love him enough when he was a child. Actually, if you investigate, you find out that, as a matter of fact, he did love him very much and everything was all right. Well, then, it's because she was overindulgent when he was a child. So by having a vague theory, it's possible to get either result. Oh, wait. Now, the cure for this one is the following. It would be possible to say, if it were possible to state ahead of time how much love is not enough and how much love is overindulgent exactly, and then there would be a perfectly legitimate theory against which you can make tests. It is usually said when this is pointed out, how much love is and so on, oh, you're dealing with psychological matters, the things can't be defined so precisely. Yes, but then you can't claim to know anything about it. Now I want to concentrate from now on, because I'm a theoretical physicist, I'm more delighted with this end of the problem, as to what goes, how do you make the guesses. Now it's strictly, as I said before, not of any importance where the guess comes from. It's only important that it should agree with experiment, and that it should be definite as possible, as definite as possible. What you say then is very simple. We've set up a machine, a great computing machine. which has a random wheel in it that makes a succession of guesses. And each time it guesses a hypothesis about how nature should work, computes immediately the consequences and makes a comparison to a list of experimental results that it has at the other end. In other words, guessing is a dumb man's job. Actually, it's quite the opposite, and I will try to explain why. The first problem is how to start. You see, I'll start with all the known principles. But the principles that are all known are inconsistent with each other. So something has to be removed. So we get a lot of letters from people. We're always getting letters from people who are insisting that we ought to make holes in our guesses as follows. You see, you make a hole to make room for a new guess. Somebody says to you, people always say space is continuous, but how do you know when you get to a small enough dimension that there really are enough points in between? It isn't just a lot of dots separated by little distances. Or they say, you know those quantum mechanical amplitudes that you told me about, they're so complicated and absurd. What makes you think those are right? Maybe they aren't right. I get a lot of letters with such content, but I must say that such remarks are perfectly obvious and are perfectly clear to anybody who's working on this problem, and it doesn't do any good to point this out. The problem is not what might be wrong, but what might be substituted precisely in place of it. If you say anything precise, for example, in the case of a continuous space, suppose the precise proposition is that space really consists of a series of dots only, and the space between them doesn't mean anything, and the dots are in a cubic array. Then we can prove that immediately is wrong. That doesn't work. You see, the problem is not to change or to say something might be wrong, but to replace it by something, and that is not so easy. As soon as any real, definite idea is substituted, it becomes almost immediately apparent that it doesn't work. Secondly, there's an infinite number of possibilities of these simple types. It's something like this. You're sitting working very hard. You work for a long time trying to open a safe. And some Joe comes along who doesn't know anything about what you're doing or anything except that you're trying to open a safe. He says, you know, why don't you try the combination 10, 20, 30? Because you're busy. You're trying a lot of things. Maybe you already tried 10, 20, 30. Maybe you know that the middle number is already 32 and not 20. Maybe you know that, as a matter of fact, this is a 5-digit combination. There we go. So these letters don't do any good, and so please don't send me any letters trying to tell me how the thing is going to work. I read them to make sure that I haven't already thought of that. But it takes too long to answer them because I usually in the class try 10, 20, 30.
That scientific method was fundamental to Commodities Corporation. They all had that deep in their blood. They knew they had to prove. They knew they had to test. They knew they had to research. Why am I going off on a tangent about a company that was bought out by Goldman Sachs in 1997, reading from an article in 1981? Because this stuff is absolutely timeless. Absolutely timeless. And you know what? It gets harder and harder and harder for the average person to find examples of this type of thinking, of this type of success. Because guess what? The people that know how to do this don't really want to talk about it as much today. You can't find as many great articles today. You can't find Amos Hofstadter's rules published like he did. I mean, you can go find them. But I'm just saying the contributions, their desire at the time to prove that they were seeing something different, there's less of that today. So for me, I see no problem in reaching back to a firm that was making a ton of money in the 1970s and early 1980s and using that example today because it's 100% timeless. Let me continue with an excerpt from Fortune, the magazine, 1981. Commodities Corporation's traders were then disciples of fundamental analysis. In commodities, as in the stock market, fundamental and technical analysis are the two major schools of investing. The fundamentalist studies the economic realities, supply and demand factors, that underlie market values. The technician focuses on price and market volume information and examines past trends in the belief that old patterns will repeat themselves. Now, just for me to interject here for a second, some of what I'm going to read, we have to keep in mind, this is the author of the magazine article writing. Not everything in terms of uniformity on language and definition is perfect, but I think you'll get my point as I finish reading this. Continuing. As a fundamentalist, Weimar fed the cocoa model he developed in his thesis with a vast array of supply and demand information. He compiled the history of rainfall and humidity for the cocoa-growing countries of Africa and correlated it with the size of the harvest. That enabled him to evaluate the maturing crops in the plantations of Ghana and Ivory Coast before publication of government figures, which were often inaccurate anyway. Weimar hired his own cocoa pod counter, a German who toured African cocoa fields in a Land Rover, examining the same cocoa trees several times during the growing season and recording the number, length, and condition of the pods. And as a humorous aside in this article, since a cocoa tree is as tall as an apple tree and contains about 25 pods, the counter at times suffered from a stiff neck. To make matters worse, the Land Rover broke down a lot. Despite their thoroughness, the fundamentalist traders didn't perform much better than the Land Rover. In 1970, its first year, Commodities Corporation lost $100,000. At a board meeting, Weimar and Vanderson proposed diversifying by developing a technical trading system. Samuelson, as an aside, who went on to win the Nobel Prize and really thought markets were a rational situation. At a board meeting, Weimar and Vanderson proposed diversifying by developing a technical trading system. Samuelson and Kuttner, firm adherents of the random walk theory for commodities as well as stocks, tried to discourage the idea. How a commodities price changed yesterday, they contended, tells an investor nothing about how it will perform tomorrow. Amos Hofstadter sided with Weimar. The trader Weimar affectionately referred to as our 70-year-old guru is basically a fundamentalist. But he also followed price patterns. Hofstadter never bucked a trend in prices for long, no matter what the fundamentalists said. When he decided that a market's supply and demand prospects looked good, he put up 1/3 of his ultimate position. If he lost 25% of that stake, he'd get out. Quote, "Never mind the cheese," he'd crack. "Let me out of the trap." If the market swung his way, he'd add another third, taking a final position when prices had climbed half as high as he thought they'd go. Commodities Corporation paid Hofstadter the tribute of computerizing the history of some of his old accounts to examine how he'd built a position as prices shifted. These studies became informal guidelines for the firm's other traders. Hofstadter himself learned Fortran, a computer language, so he could help out with programming, as he did for 7 years until he died in a 1977 auto accident. Quote, "He was the most remarkable investor I ever knew," end quote, says Samuelson. "He made money in commodities 50 years straight." Now you see why, is an interjection for me, you see why now I laid out that foundation in the beginning about commodities and trading. Hofstadter did not make money in commodities 50 years straight. He traded a system that made money in commodities 50 years straight. This author simply did not know how to phrase accurately what these guys were doing. The article continues. The challenge was to make his methods reproducible for others who didn't have his flair or caliber. At Hofstadter's urging, Weimar assigned Vanderson to set up a technical system known as trend following. In its simplest form, trend following instructs a speculator to buy a commodity whenever the price goes up and sell it when the price goes down. An investor has to get in or out of the commodity every time the price reverses so that he's constantly whipsawed by small losses. The goal, of course, is to outstrip those losses by catching a long upward or downward move. Now, I give the author credit there. He does define trend following, but you can see the confusion in this author writing this piece in 1981. Sure, Commodities Corporation started off as a fundamental shop. That's the direction they were going. But it didn't last long. They were a trend-following shop. An absolute trend-following shop, dominated by men like Bruce Kovner, Michael Marcus, Ed Seykota, Louis Bacon, Paul Tudor Jones, men that all understand trend following deep in their gut. Mechanical trend following, systematic trend following. This was not about fundamentals. Now, I think if you read between the lines, you can see what Commodities Corporation was doing. And they are very clear, ultimately, that they were trend followers. I want to add one small clip from the Nobel laureate Paul Samuelson, who was one of the original investors in Commodities Corporation. So here's a man that does not believe it's possible for trend-following traders to make money.
Your asset allocation?
No comment.
Your suggested asset allocation, is it still 50, 25, 25?
Well, I'll tell you the most important question that vexes the minds of people like me on the Finance Committee of the National Academy of Sciences is the following. The evidence is overwhelming that 1,000 timers try to buy when stocks are low and sell when they're high is a damnably awful record. And it isn't so hard to sell, but you don't know when to get back in. And typically, things move very, very fast in normal cycles when they go back. What should you think when somebody as wise as Alan Greenspan says this is a once-in-a-century event? Should you still, in that case, take in no sale at all? And that's a very hard decision.
He believes in the random walk. It is absolutely not possible from his perspective, and he's got a Nobel Prize to his credit. But he was smart enough, or cagey enough, how one might want to phrase it, smart enough or cagey enough to help fund the start of Commodities Corporation. And even then, did not appreciate where the traders, the technical traders like Hofstadter, wanted to go in the firm. He didn't appreciate it and said, hey, this isn't going to work. So here was the man with the Nobel Prize, believes in the random walk, but makes a fortune selling his stake in a company that's primarily a trend-following trader. Don't you just love history? Don't you just love how the world really works? That doesn't mean Samuelson was a bad guy. I'm sure he's not. I've watched some of his old videos. He's obviously brilliant. They don't give Nobel Prizes out to guys that aren't very, very bright and very accomplished. But on the margins, when you start to examine what really happens in the world, this secretive strategy of trend following has just woven itself throughout time. And if you look closely, you can find it. You won't see it if you just say to yourself, how do I trade stocks? Or how do I trade commodities? It is not about the market. It's not about the instrument. It's about your strategy. And if you don't have a strategy, you are simply rolling the dice, gambling. Go LexisNexis search everything you can about Commodities Corporation. If you want to feel confident, if you want to feel comfortable in the people that have come before you doing these things that I'm talking about, the evidence is there. The people that were doing this 4 and 5 decades ago, you can find their insights. You can find all of those great ideas that they illuminate. It's there. But you've got to be hungry. You've got to want it. You've got to dig in. And the challenge is to find a life. And I think it is binary. It's a choice. Up or down, heads or tails. Which way are you going to go? If you choose heads, and you take the risk, there's no guarantee it's going to work out. As Jim Rogers has said, and I'm paraphrasing, if you go down that path to run the 4-minute mile, to be the Kirov ballerina, to make your first million, you might not end up being that sweet, lovable self you were when you were 17. Because to get to that end goal requires complete dedication. There is no deviation. You must dedicate. Oh, I just want to have a nice lifestyle. Well, guess what? You're going to be like your guy living next door to you. You're going to be in the cookie cutter suburban neighborhood. And that's it. That's the legacy. I'm not necessarily saying that's bad. Who am I to say? Everyone has to make their choices. I'm just painting a picture for you. If you do want something else, if you want to spend your lifetime trying to make something really big happen, there's a different way to think about it. And this clip expresses that desire in a very odd, unique, fascinating, hit you in the stomach sort of way.
How much?
69 cents.
And the gas?
Y'all getting any rain up your way?
What wave would that be?
I seen you was from Dallas.
What business is it of yours? Where I'm from? Friendo?
I didn't mean nothing by it.
Didn't mean nothing.
Just passing the time. If you don't want to accept that, I don't know what else I can do for you. Will there be something else?
I don't know. Will there?
Is something wrong?
With what?
With anything.
Is that what you're asking me? Is there something wrong with anything?
Will there be anything else?
You already asked me that.
Well, I need to see about closing now.
See about closing?
Yes, sir.
What time do you close?
Now. We close now.
Now is not a time. What time do you close?
Generally around dark. At dark.
You don't know what you're talking about, do you?
Sir?
I said, you don't know what you're talking about. What time do you go to bed?
Sir?
You're a bit deaf, aren't you? I said, what time do you go to bed?
Somewhere around 9:30. I'd say around 9:30.
I could come back then.
Why would you be coming back? We'll be closed.
Yeah, you said that.
Well, I got to close now.
You live in that house out back?
Yes, I do.
You lived here all your life?
This is my wife's father's place originally.
You married into it?
We lived in Temple, Texas for many years. Raised a family there in Temple. We come out here about 4 years ago.
You married into it?
That's the way you want to put it.
I don't have some way to put it. That's the way it is. What's the most you ever lost on a coin toss?
Sir?
The most you ever lost on a coin toss?
I don't know. I couldn't say.
Call it.
Call it?
Yes.
For what?
Just call it.
Well, we need to know what we're calling it for here.
You need to call it. I can't call it for you. Well, it wouldn't be fair.
I didn't put nothing up.
Yes, you did. You've been putting it up your whole life. You just didn't know it. You know what date is on this coin?
No.
1958. It's been traveling 22 years to get here. And now it's here. And it's either heads or tails. And you have to say, call it.
Well, look, I need to know what I stand to win.
Everything.
How's that?
You stand to win everything, call it.
All right. Heads, then.
Well done. Don't put it in your pocket.
Sir?
Don't put it in your pocket. It's your lucky quarter.
Where you want me to put it?
Anywhere not in your pocket. What will get mixed in with the others and become just a coin. Which it is.
And last but not least, Lasse Peterson of AQR. Lasse Peterson is a finance professor at Copenhagen Business School and NYU Stern School of Business. He is also a principal at AQR Capital Management. His new book is titled Efficiently Inefficient. That's what we break apart today. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Efficiently Inefficient, the title of your new work from the last few months. I think obviously you're breaking some, I guess you could say it's some new ground, but obviously we've all seen in the last year or 2 years where the Nobel Prize was split between Fama and Schiller. I'm guessing that there was a certain inspiration for your title from that. If not, tell me the inspiration.
Yeah, that's right. So there's been this long academic debate about whether markets are efficient. And Gene Farmer, he stands for this view that markets are fully efficient and prices reflect the fundamental value of securities versus prices are inefficient. And Schiller, he sort of represents the opposite point of view, that market prices are irrational. They're driven by investor irrationality, and investors push prices far away from their fundamental values. I have a great respect for both Farmer and Schiller. I know them both well. But I wanted to sort of take a different point of view, one that is somewhere in between, but also tries to be well defined, saying that market prices are neither fully efficient nor completely inefficient, but they are inefficient enough that smart asset managers and active investors have a chance to beat the market and be compensated for all the costs they have associated with actually becoming informed about asset prices and trading. At the same time, market prices are efficient enough that the marginal investor is sort of indifferent about pursuing this active investing, with the benefits being, better performance, but the cost being transactions cost, asset management fees, and the cost associated with finding a good asset manager. So there's just that equilibrium in which markets are just the right place in the between. They're just efficiently inefficient.
For the audience, so they know a little bit about this, your new work, Efficiently Inefficient, you do profile and you have a kind of a Q&A session with some very prominent names. And I want to quickly rattle those off: from Lee Ainsley, Jim Chanos, Cliff Asness, George Soros, David Harding, Myron Scholes, Ken Griffith, John Paulson. Obviously, some of the biggest names out there, and all very different styles. And we don't even have enough time today to break apart all those different styles. I'm going to kind of pick a few with the distinction that you're drawing, that you just described. How did these great traders, these great managers with such different styles, and I'm thinking in particular in this work, George Soros and David Harding are pretty dogmatic about, hey, the efficient market hypothesis is fill in the blank, bad word. So I'm curious, when you would explain your perspective, how did the managers and traders feel about your perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. So definitely you're right that many of these managers, they would certainly not feel that markets are fully efficient. They feel very strongly that their job is to beat the market, and they succeed in that job, not because they're just lucky, but because markets are not efficient. You're right. David Harding spoke particularly strongly against the efficient market hypothesis. I think a lot of these guys at the same time, though, are sympathetic to this view that, yes, there is a scope to have edge, but very efficient to exploit these market inefficiencies. That's sort of another interpretation of the title. And I think they're actually quite sympathetic to this view. They don't think that just anybody off the street can easily beat the market. You have to be really efficient to actually accomplish that.
Were you familiar with and had met with and spoken with many of these managers and traders? Of course, some of them clearly very well. The full suite of them, were you intimately familiar in terms of having conversations, or was a lot of these interviews brand new with these particular managers? Obviously, their styles and what they do, but I'm just curious about your connection with them.
Yeah, you're right. I certainly knew of all of them. They're all extremely famous, as you say. I knew some of them well. I knew Cliff Asness. He's my colleague at AQR Capital Management, so he was the one by far I knew the best. I knew Myron Scholes quite well through my meeting him at academic conferences and in other connections. I also knew John Paulson. He endowed a chair at NYU, and I was lucky enough to actually hold the John Paulson chair. I was a John Paulson professor at NYU. So I met him in that connection. And I think several of the others I had never met. And so it's really exciting and fun to meet these guys and get their perspective on how they invest, and really try to get an opportunity to ask them exactly how they do it, and how do they get their edge, and what motivates them, and what are the key drivers of their success.
Was there a common theme developing in how they thought, regardless of style and technique? Just a very big picture question before we dive in.
Obviously they're all very smart. They're all extremely driven and ambitious. I think they're all disciplined and clear thinkers. In terms of their investment styles and methods, they're very different, but I think there are some common themes. Even though, they use very different words, I think a lot of them are using trading strategies related to value investing and momentum trading. So Cliff Asness, of course, has actually written academic papers and was one of the discoverers of momentum trading in stocks, together with a few other academics. And so he talks a lot about value momentum, but, a guy like George Soros, he'll talk in very different terms. He will talk about trading on boom-bust cycles, for instance. But when he says he's riding the boom, in some sense he's being a momentum trader. And when he positions himself for the bust, at that point he effectively becomes a value investor. When you think about Lee Ainsley, who's the famous Tiger Cop, has done very well trading stocks globally. Obviously value investing and thinking about the quality of those companies is a key driver. As value is also, a key driver for a short seller like James Chanos, who basically thinks about, which companies are overvalued, which companies might be fraudulent or have some a little bit too creative accounting and so on. He'll want to short those. And in shorting overvalued firms, he's basically taking the short side of being a value investor.
You bring up a great point about terminology and jargon. I can think to the classic phrase that Soros uses, reflexivity. I'm sure, it's a term that's been out there. There's a certain philosophical bent to it. He's written several books. But I think a great place where you can take apart some of the jargon and perhaps with your best professorial hat is the different types of momentum. And AQR is obviously known for both types, frankly, and quite a bit of not only the trading, but academic work. Why don't you, for the audience, give people, you mentioned Cliff and the type of momentum that he discovered, but time series momentum, the type of momentum that might be more commonly called trend following. Can you compare and contrast those two types of momentum for the audience?
What's called momentum in stock trading, often it's also called cross-sectional momentum, basically means looking at the different stocks out there and seeing which stocks have outperformed other stocks. And then you will tend to go long the stocks that have been outperforming, while at the same time shorting stocks that have been underperforming. And then you're basically hoping that those outperforming stocks over the last, let's say, 6 to 12 months will continue to outperform over the next month. So that is to be compared with what's called time series momentum, which basically means looking typically at an index, whether it's a stock index or a currency or commodity, and basically seeing if it's been going up in value, it's been trending up over the last year, let's say. So time series momentum is related to looking at every security seen in isolation, whereas cross-sectional momentum is looking at relative outperformance. And the difference is, for instance, if let's say the whole stock market has been going down, and a cross-sectional momentum investor, he might go long stocks that have been dropping less in value. So it might be that, let's suppose all the stocks in a given universe have been actually going down. Some of them have been going down less, so those are outperforming. A cross-sectional momentum investor would buy those and short those that drop by more. Whereas a time series momentum investor or managed futures type of investor, he would just short all of them. He would say, they're all trending down. Let me short all of them.
Going back to something you said as well, too, you mentioned the idea that some aspects of the technique of these very diverse traders and managers, that there's commonalities. I think one of the commonalities that I would love you to talk about is gambler's ruin, risk ruin.
Yeah, they're certainly all quite aware of risk management, and several of them actually was also told me about some of their losing trades. I think a lot of them are obviously very happy about the winning trades, but they're also quite marked and have learned a lot from their losing trades. It's really important that you learn from your losing trade, but also that you don't go bankrupt from your losing trades.
Are there any losing trades in a particular trader or manager that come to mind right off the top of your head?
Yes, so Lee Ainsley talks about one particular losing trade where he had like a great investment thesis. His analysis was correct, but it turned out that the management that were supposed to deliver on those great promises for that particular company was not capable of doing it. And he really learned the importance of the management and has since really paid very close attention to the management of companies he invests in. And, also Chinos talks about a short position he had that kept moving against him for a variety of reasons. Fortunately for him, he has a position limit, so as the short position moves against him, it gets bigger. And so this is one of the risks of short selling. When you're short selling, you lose when the stock price goes up. When the stock price goes up, if you have a fixed number of shares, now you're actually short more dollars or, a bigger value, and the risk potentially increases. So therefore, he has a position limit, and he would actually reduce his position as the position moved against him. And that helped him to limit the losses in that particular trade.
Most people out there, if they're familiar with Julian Robertson and the Tiger Cubs story, generally a fundamental style of thinking and trading. I thought was interesting was your questioning to Lee Ainsley about his quantitative aspects of his trading methodology, particularly portfolio construction.
Yeah, that's right. So he has a number of investment professionals who go out and meet with management and meet with the different competitors and try to really understand the industry where each company operates. But at the same time, he told me about the fact that they actually have a quantitative system to evaluate their positions, the risk exposures, and to really help them make the portfolio construction as efficient as possible.
Looking at all these managers, looking at these traders, their track records, studying their performance, is there a strategy? I don't want to ask the silly question, is there a best strategy? There are different strategies for different reasons. But is there a strategy, do you think, across these managers, these traders, that's perhaps more repeatable? There's only one George Soros, there's only one Paulson. What about survivorship bias? Do you see a particular style across this selection of traders that's more repeatable?
Well, I think what's common among these strategies is that they're not just this magic effort by this genius, but I think that we can actually understand the core of many of these strategies. There is an economic logic behind why they work, but at the same time, they require tremendous skill and dedication and hard work to execute them well. I think in my book, I tried for each of these styles and strategies. So I talk about equity strategies, macro strategies, arbitrage strategies. And for each of these, I try to understand what is the basic economics behind why they work and how you could create a repeatable process that could deliver potentially outperformance. It certainly has to be very difficult to do because otherwise these things would be arbitraged away.
Were you looking, when you were putting this book together, were you looking for the particular styles or were you looking for the particular manager and trader?
I started with actually thinking about what are the various classic styles. And then for each of these 8 styles that I identified, I sought to basically get the most prominent current investor who's still active. And so I wrote down these 8 names and I thought, how am I going to get them to say yes? And so I started with the people I knew the best. And then when those guys said yes, I had a connection to someone who knew George Soros. So then Soros said yes. And then when I started asking the next people, it started getting easier when you have Paulson, Asness, Soros, and the like.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there's a certain, to put that together, anyone that does something like that, as someone who's written a few books and does a podcast, there's a certain method to the madness, so to speak, to put together that roster. Something that Cliff brings up that you have as a question, and you're talking about the difference between the real world and the academic world. I like his answer because, we can go back at a performance track record, for example, and you can look and say, well, there was a 3-year flat period or there was a significant drawdown, but then you came out of it and everything was okay. Cliff points out that it's in the real world, it's not so easy to just look at track records like that, is it?
That's right. And he talks about when you're actually going through such a tough period, there's a time dilation, he calls it, where it seems like time is going much more slowly. And it's really painful, actually, to have those losses, even if you have greater gains coming out of it. It's really just an extremely tough period. And I think that's part of the reason these strategies work, in that it certainly is hard work to do it, but it's also really stressful, and it requires a lot of discipline to just continue to do the right thing. When you're starting to face losses, there's a lot of temptation to panic or, do various things that are not part of the original plan, because you think those losses might, be too difficult to handle otherwise.
It's interesting too. A lot of the traders and managers that you put in this book, that's one of the things they have to deal with is on a daily basis or a monthly basis, whatever, dealing with clients and kind of making sure clients are on board with the strategy and understanding that there could be down periods, et cetera. I'd like to bring something up that I talked about in advance with you, which is Warren Buffett. A lot of people don't know that Warren Buffett has had multiple 50% drawdowns, so to speak. I don't know the exact number, but there's something to that if you're going to produce the type of performance that he's produced over the years, you do have to be willing to take and handle a significant down period. But why don't you talk about Buffett and his alpha? I think you really put together some significant insights where a lot of people say, well, hey, hold on. If Buffett's just a value investor, why is he so much better than everyone else? You've kind of broken down and taken apart why he is so much better.
Yeah, that's right. So we got the data on Buffett's performance. We looked at both the performance in the sense of just the Berkshire Hathaway stock. So as you know, Warren Buffett is running the firm Berkshire Hathaway. And so one way to look at his performance is to just follow that stock price. But you could also see the publicly traded stocks that he holds. So Berkshire Hathaway has to make a filing to the SEC about the publicly traded stocks that they own, so you can put together that portfolio and simulate that portfolio at the same time. And the first thing we looked at is just how good is Warren Buffett? How good do you need to be to become one of the richest people in the world? And it turns out his Sharpe ratio is about just over 0.7, between 0.7 and 0.8, which I think actually surprised a lot of people when we showed them this number, because a lot of people had assumed that he had a Sharpe ratio above 1 or even above 2, as a lot of hedge funds are bragging about numbers in that range. It turns out he has had tremendously high return, but he has also had quite significant risk, leaving him with the Sharpe ratio, which is still incredibly impressive because it's about double the Sharpe ratio of the market. So for the risk he's taken, which has been substantial, he's actually, over the long haul, been able to deliver double the return relative to that of the market. So it's really an astonishing performance. And our research doesn't in any way try to diminish that incredible accomplishment. But so when other researchers have looked at it, they have recognized he's a value investor. He talks about being a value investor. And so you can also regress his return on the return to being a value investor, which is called the value factor. And that factor explains some of his performance, but only a small part, and it leaves a huge alpha, that's sort of a big unexplained part. What we then did is to say, well, let's also regress him on the return to being what we call a quality investor. So what he buys is not just cheap stocks, but he also buys high quality stocks. And he talks about that in his speeches and his writings, that he really likes to buy high quality goods and high quality companies at a reasonable price. When we actually regress him on both sort of the standard factor, including the value factor, as well as this what we call quality minus junk, and also a factor that captures sort of more safe stocks, what we call betting against beta, then it turns out we can actually explain a large part of his performance and basically get a strategy that looks very much like his performance and has an ability to explain almost all his alpha. What we interpret that to be is basically what he is doing, what he's saying he's doing. Yes, he's a value investor, he's a quality investor. He likes to buy stable, profitable, high-quality companies at a reasonable price. And those types of stocks have done well in general. The interesting finding is it's not just the quality firms that he has been buying that have done well, have been good investments. It's quality firms in general. And so those types of stocks in general have performed well. And he has benefited from being a very early investor to recognize that and exploit it. And he's able to leverage it through his insurance company in a very clever and very smart way, and really performed extremely well as a result of those investment choices and that leverage strategy.
Yeah, you mentioned leverage. He definitely is using leverage to a degree that perhaps the novice investor might not understand, but obviously he's doing it in a very smart way, but he's not a trader devoid of leverage.
Yeah, that's right. He speaks quite negatively about leverage often, and certainly there are risks to leverage. If you look at his portfolio and his performance, you can see that he uses leverage in two ways. Number one is that you can simply look at his balance sheet and you can see that he has leverage. He has a number of liabilities. He's been issuing bonds, for instance, as one source of leverage, and he has a lot of insurance-related liabilities. And we estimate his leverage is about 1.6 to 1, meaning that, for every dollar of equity capital, he will then invest in $1.6 of companies. Another way to see that he's using leverage is, you remember I mentioned that we could simulate the performance of his portfolio of publicly traded stocks. We could look at the volatility, the risk of that strategy, and then we can look at the risk or the volatility of Berkshire Hathaway stock. Turns out the volatility of Berkshire Hathaway stock is bigger than the volatility of his publicly traded stocks. That certainly is consistent with the idea that the Berkshire applies leverage to the portfolio. So if you add leverage to a portfolio, then you will tend to increase the risk. And so that sort of ranking of the risk is consistent with leverage.
It's just a tool, and he's using the tool wisely.
That's right.
Yep. I want to go into this notion of back testing, but I first want to start with a quote from Cliff Asness. Quote, "I think that good quant investment managers can really be thought of as financial economists who have codified their beliefs into a repeatable process. They are distinguished by diversification, sticking to their process with discipline, and the ability to engineer portfolio characteristics." For those traders out there today that call themselves more fundamentally driven or value, is there anybody that's not back testing their world in 2015?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of discretionary traders that will look at a unique special situation that you might have a very hard time back testing there. So if you're an event-driven trader and there's a new type of event, perhaps you can't back test that, but perhaps you can still convince yourself that you're buying something at a discount to its fundamental value. You're relying on the general principle that sort of buying things cheap has worked over the long term. You might not be able to backtest in a more scientific way this type of strategy if you're trading a new type of securities and so on. So I think actually probably still the majority of investing is done in a more discretionary manner.
Do you think, though, that guys like Harding, guys like Asness, with this mindset of testing and this quantitative mindset, is it slowly making a dent in the consciousness where perhaps investors in the future are going to say, you know what, we want more than the discretionary ability. We want to really understand from a scientific. Are some of the guys winning over the headspace, or is it still in the early stages, so to speak?
So I myself, as you know, is a quant investor. I am a strong believer in using scientific methods to evaluate investment strategies. But at the same time, I try to keep an open mind. So I don't want to say that one method is better than the other method. I think you're right that the more scientific way of investing has basically made large inroads over the last 20 years. But at the same time, I think there is a role for it. And I personally have a great respect for some of the more discretionary traders that, when Chanos, for instance, is finding, funny things in the accounting numbers in a way that you can't really get a computer to do right now, or when other discretionary traders are doing things that cannot easily be codified in a computer because it's more relying on more soft information or different, case-by-case type of analysis. I personally have a great respect for that also. And so I'm not sure that will gravitate to everybody investing in one way. I think investing fundamentally will have many aspects, and it's driven by people having different methods and different points of view. And that's basically what creates a buyer and a seller, that there are all these different ways of doing it.
Let's talk about the role of hedge funds in the economy. The typical understanding, I mean, clearly not for those that know, but for the typical understanding, there's often negative press, especially at chaotic moments. And words like speculation will be thrown around in a really negative sort of way. But there is a role for hedge funds in the economy, and it's not just necessarily the investors themselves that invest in the particular fund. I mean, some people might say, "Hey, why should I be concerned with assorted hedge funds? I'm not invested in these." Or talk about, from a big picture standpoint, we could talk about this all day, the role of hedge funds in the economy.
Hedge fund can play a very positive role in the economy for a number of reasons. I think, first of all, our free market economy basically allocates resources based on prices. If somebody invents a drug that can cure a particular disease, he may not have enough capital to pursue that cure, but he can, this is a very promising idea that others can understand, he can then raise a lot of money through the capital markets and then build the factories to pursue that idea. Whereas another inventor who has a perhaps not very useful idea, he might have a difficult time raising money, and therefore the machines and the real capital, the factories are allocated to the more promising idea. Now that whole notion relies on market prices being relatively efficient. The company with the more promising ideas, their stock price has to be higher, their market cap has to be higher in order for them to be able to really raise more capital and build more machines. And so this is incredibly important for the market economy. And hedge funds and other active investors are tending to buy low and sell high, so they tend to push prices in the right direction, making markets more efficient. And again, that's just incredibly important. They help to provide liquidity, make it easier to buy and sell for investors, make it easier for people to save for retirement. A lot of large pension funds are invested in these types of vehicles, and hopefully hedge funds and other active investors contribute to their performance, although of course they take large fees and they keep a lot of the benefits for their own sake too. So I think certainly fair to say that investors should be very concerned about the fees and to what extent they themselves enjoy the benefits of those investment strategies.
You ask a question to David Harding in the book, and you ask the question essentially is, does your research suggest that it's better to have the same type of model for every instrument, or is it better to have a very specific model for each one? Why don't you talk about his response and your feelings about the response, your experience as well?
Yeah, so I agree with his response that it's very important to have a very robust model that works across a number of different securities. It's often tempting to really tailor your strategy so it looks like it's the best for every asset. You might want one particular managed future strategy for gold, another strategy for wheat, yet another strategy in commodities, and so on. If you try to do something like that, you might get an extremely good performance in your back test, in your simulation of what would have happened in the past, because you're able to tailor this. But you might be exploiting a lot of noise, a lot of randomness, and you might actually may end up with a model that works less well going forward in the future when it really matters, when you're actually trading for live ammunition and when it's really important that your model works. So to avoid that kind of data mining or overfitting of your model, it's often better actually to have a simpler strategy, one that how do you get confidence that your strategy has a chance to work going forward? Well, if the same strategy has worked for gold, not just the last year, but not just last 10 years, perhaps the last 50 or 100 years, and if the same strategy has worked across all the commodities, and not just all the commodities, it's worked for a bunch of currencies, if it's worked for equity indices, if it's worked also in fixed income markets, then you start to get a lot of conviction that this strategy is not just randomness, it's not just a coincidence of the past that will not repeat itself in the future. Then you start to get some conviction that this type of trend following strategy or managed future strategy has a chance to actually work in the future as well.
You were part of the AQR study, the Century of Evidence on Trend Following, yes?
That's right, yeah.
Was there anything in terms of going into that project? I mean, you obviously had ideas about how things might unfold. Were there any elements or insights going through that process, doing that research, doing that study that surprised you?
Well, it was a quite exciting project, actually, because we had been doing a lot of research on what are the best trend following strategies and showing that some relatively simple trend following strategies actually have performed extremely well over the last 20 to 30 years. And they've worked on average, not every year or every day, but on average for every instrument we looked at, which is sort of unusual. You sort of think that it's going to work perhaps at the portfolio level, but not necessarily for every instrument in the portfolio. But we found this very consistent performance even at the instrument level. So we were thinking about, wow, this looks really robust, but how can we get even more conviction? How can we get another out-of-sample study? Of course, one out-of-sample study is just waiting and looking at the live performance going forward. We didn't have the patience for that, so we said, well, let's actually go ahead and collect data, historical data on prices that are earlier than what we had looked at before. So rather than looking just over the last 20, 30 years, let's look at a full century of data. We were a little bit worried, of course, that what it seemed like such a robust result maybe, didn't work the 60 to 70 years prior. But to our surprise, it actually had worked really extremely well also historically, and about as well as in the more recent sample.
You mentioned in your book about the arms race and high frequency trading. I think there's an arms race amongst trend following managers to see how many centuries they can go back, right? So I think you guys inspired with your first paper. I think several others have come right after, huh?
That's right, yeah.
One of the things in your conversation with George Soros, he talks about that you should not risk a significant part of your capital. Therefore, if you have a good run and you're making a lot of profit, you can risk your profits more than you can risk your capital. That's a very classic time series momentum trend following type thinking, a very quant thinking. Did you talk to Soros about the implementation of his strategies? Because, he has this very philosophical view. Did you talk to him about implementation at all?
Yeah, I think he has a different way of implementing it, not so quantitative, but he's also very concerned about, the downside risk versus upside risk. So what he's really hoping to find is a strategy or a bet that has a big upside potential and a limited downside potential, and then put on a lot of money into that bet, like he did on the British pound. And he talks about, he had the courage to really put such an enormous position on the British pound, because if the pound broke, he would make a lot of money. But given that it was trading in a band, there was almost no risk that it would make a large move going against him. And that type of thinking actually, he told me, inspired John Paulson in the way he sized his subprime bet. So I asked actually John Paulson whether it was true that he got the idea to size the bet he did the way he did from Soros. And he confirmed that in that interview. So that was sort of a fun back and forth.
Yeah, it's those kinds of guys. I think everyone has to look with deep admiration, because many of the traders that you talk about in your book would not have the latitude to take those kinds of bets. There's a certain discretionary element. I can use some interesting sports metaphors and some kind of randy language to describe it. But let's just say it takes a certain amount of gusto to do what those guys do in terms of their big bets, doesn't it?
It definitely does, yeah. And to keep riding at them when they've made a lot of money, to not just fold but be satisfied, but really just keep the bet on until it's really delivered its full potential.
Is there anything else that you would like to tell the audience about this work in particular? Like I said, throughout this conversation, people are just going to have to get it and read it. It's dense. There's a lot of different directions that you go. Is there anything in particular that you want people to understand before they read it?
I think definitely I hope people will find it interesting. If they would like this combination of interviews with what I view as the 8 of the best managers out there, combined with sort of the economic thinking that goes behind those strategies and a more thorough analysis of how would you actually pursue those strategies, and what does it tell us about how markets work and how efficient capital markets are.
Where's the best place that people can go to find out more about you and your firm? Clearly the book is on Amazon right now. Where can they go?
I have a personal website, lhpedersen.com. AQR is obviously at aqr.com.
Appreciate your time today, sir.
Thank you.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.